The rain had been falling for 3 hours before Lena finally admitted she was lost. She had told herself it was a shortcut. She had told herself she knew these woods. She had been wrong on both counts, and now the trees were pressing in from every side, black and dripping, and the sound of the gathering was somewhere behind her, too far behind her, and the cold was the kind that gets into your bones and stays. She was not supposed to be at the gathering at all. Lower-ranked wolves from the outer settlements were permitted to attend the festival grounds, but not the inner tents. There were rules about that. There were rules about everything in the Aldenmore territory, and Lena had spent 22 years learning all of them, mostly by breaking them and then paying the price quietly and alone. But tonight she had paid the entrance tax with the last of her month's savings, had dressed in the best thing she owned, a dark green coat with a missing button at the collar, and had walked 2 hours through the forest to reach the festival lights because she had not seen another living face in 11 days, and the silence of her cottage was beginning to feel less like peace and more like a warning. The festival had been loud and bright and completely indifferent to her. She had stood at the edges of it for 2 hours, watching people who knew each other laugh about things she could not hear, eating food she could not afford from stalls that looked past her, and then the rain had started, and the crowd had scattered, and she had taken what she thought was the path back toward the outer settlement road, and instead walked herself deeper into territory she did not recognize. Now the cold was serious. Her coat was soaked through. Her boots were making sounds that boots should not make. She could not feel her left hand properly. She had stopped walking 15 minutes ago because stopping felt like the first honest decision she had made all night. At least standing still in the rain was a clear problem, not a moving one. But standing still was also making her shiver so violently that her teeth were clicking together in a rhythm she could not control. There were lights ahead. She did not think about what kind of lights they were. She did not think about who they might belong to, or what the rules were about approaching lit tents in the inner grounds after the main gathering had dispersed. She thought, warmth. She thought, dry. She moved toward them. The tent was larger than she expected. It was made of heavy dark canvas, the kind that costs more than her rent, and it was staked into the earth with iron pins at the corners, and there was a single lamp burning inside that made the walls glow a deep amber from within, like something alive. The flap was not fully closed. A gap at the side, wide enough for a person to step through sideways, showed a strip of warm light. She told herself she would only stand at the entrance. She told herself she would only get warm enough to feel her hand again, and then she would leave. She told herself a lot of things while she was pushing through the gap in the canvas, and all of them were lies. She told herself to keep moving. Inside was warmth. Real warmth. The kind that hits you after real cold, and makes your eyes water, and your skin feel like it is being touched by something gentle. There were no other people visible. There were blankets folded on a low bench, a coat hanging on a wooden stand, a pair of boots beside it that were large enough that her brain noted the fact, and then set it aside, because her brain was very cold and not working at its best. There was a sleeping area at the back of the tent, partitioned by a hanging length of dark fabric, and beyond it, she could hear the slow, even breathing of someone already asleep. Lena stood in the warm space and dripped onto the floor mat. She should leave. She knew she should leave. But the warmth was extraordinary, and her body was making decisions her brain was too cold to override, and her legs were walking her toward the low bench, and she was sitting down, and she was pulling her wet coat tighter around her, not because it was doing any good, but because the motion of pulling it gave her something to do with her hands, and the warmth was spreading upward from the floor through her boots, and the sound of the rain against the canvas outside was actually very beautiful when you were inside and dry, and she woke to complete darkness, and the lamp had gone out. She did not know how long she had been asleep. She knew, with the immediate and stomach-dropping clarity of someone who has made a very specific kind of mistake, that she had not meant to sleep. She had sat down for a moment. She had closed her eyes for a second. That was all she had meant to do. But her body had betrayed her, and now it was dark, and the rain was still falling but softer now, and something had changed. She was not sitting on the bench. She was lying down, and she was warm. Not tent warm, not lamp warm. Warm in the way you are warm when there is another body nearby. That specific animal warmth that has nothing to do with blankets, and everything to do with the fact that human bodies generate heat, and that heat travels, and that the chest she was currently lying against was generating a considerable amount of it. Her eyes were open. She was staring at canvas. She did not move. She did not breathe. The chest behind her was broad. The arm that had come to rest over her was heavy and still. The breathing above her head was slow and even, the breathing of a person in genuine sleep, and she lay there in the darkness listening to it and cataloging what she had done wrong and in what order. Wrong decision 1, going to the gathering alone. Wrong decision 2, thinking she knew the shortcut. Wrong decision 3, going into the tent. Wrong decision 4, sitting down. Wrong decision 5, all of it, every single part of it. She should get up now, immediately. She should remove herself from this situation before the person attached to this chest woke and found her, because whatever happened when they found her would not be good, and the words, "not good," were doing a great deal of work in her mind right now, covering possibilities that ranged from mild humiliation to something considerably worse, depending on whose tent this was. She calculated the distance to the tent flap. She calculated the weight of the arm over her. She calculated the odds that she could slide out from under it without waking the person it belonged to. The arm moved. Not to stop her. Not intentionally. It was the movement of a sleeping person shifting, the unconscious adjustment of someone deep in sleep, and it settled differently, heavier, lower, and the body behind her exhaled slowly, and the breathing evened out again, and Lena lay very still and felt her heart beating in her ears. She would wait. Just another minute. Just until the arm was a little looser, until the breathing confirmed proper deep sleep again, and then she would slide out carefully and leave, and never speak of this to anyone for the rest of her natural life, which might be short, depending on whose tent this was. She waited. The warmth was extraordinary. She had not been warm like this in, she could not remember how long. The cottage she lived in had a fireplace that ate more wood than she could afford to buy, and the winters in the outer settlements were the kind of cold that makes you forget what your own hands are supposed to feel like. She had 3 blankets, and she slept with all 3 of them, and still woke up most mornings with her breath visible in the air above her bed. This was different. This was the kind of warmth that made her entire body go heavy and still, the kind that told every anxious part of her brain to stop calculating for just a moment, to stop counting costs and distances and decisions and just, she woke to light. Not the amber light of the lamp, a gray light, a morning light, filtering through canvas, turning everything pale and colorless, and the arm was still there, and the breathing was still even, and she had not moved in however many hours it had been, and outside the tent the rain had stopped. She moved. Slowly, carefully, she shifted her weight forward, away from the warmth, drawing her arm free first, then her shoulder, turning her body with the deliberateness of someone diffusing something fragile. The arm lifted as she moved, and she held her breath, and then her feet were on the floor mat, and she was standing, and the space where she had lain was empty and cooling, and she did not look back. She walked to the tent flap. She was almost through it when she heard the voice. It was low, not loud, not sharp, not the voice of someone who had just woken and was startled, just low, and even, and completely awake, as if he had been awake for some time. "You should have left an hour ago," the voice said, "before the dawn watch starts their round." She stopped. The tent was quiet for a moment. Then she turned around. The man sitting up on the sleeping mat at the back of the tent was looking at her with dark eyes that were not unkind and not warm, and were simply, very directly, looking at her. He was large, not in the way that people described large as an insult or as a warning, just physically large, built the way some men are built when the world has needed things from them for a long time, like his body had simply arranged itself around the requirements placed on it. His jaw was unshaved, his hair was dark and slightly uneven from sleep. He was wearing a plain gray shirt, and he sat with his hands resting on his knees, which was not the posture of a man who was alarmed. It was the posture of a man who had been waiting. "The south path," he said, "is clear until the 7th bell. After that, the patrol starts from the eastern checkpoint, and you will not make it to the outer road without being seen." Lena stared at him. "I don't know your path," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "South," he said again, and then left at the fork where the old oak split. "You will smell the road before you see it." She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them moved for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He was quiet for a second. Then, "Because you were cold," he said, "and you are not a threat, and there is no reason for this to be worse than it already is." She did not ask what he meant by that. She did not ask why a man in a tent this size, with boots that large and a coat that quality hanging on the stand by the entrance, had an opinion about what would be worse. She filed it all somewhere she would look at later, when she was out and safe and had the luxury of thinking clearly. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. She left. The south path was exactly where he said it was. The old oak was exactly where he described it. She smelled the road, mud and cart oil, and the distant scent of cook fires, before she saw it, just as he had promised. She walked the 2 hours home in damp boots and a coat that was still not fully dry, and she did not let herself think about the warmth she had left behind until she was inside her own cottage with the door shut, and then she thought about it for exactly 30 seconds before putting wood on the fire and making herself eat something and telling herself the whole thing was over. It was not over. She did not know that yet. The scroll arrived 4 days later. It came with a carrier who wore the seal of the king's house on his collar, a seal she had only ever seen at great distance before, on flags and documents posted in the market square. The carrier was young and uncomfortable, and he held the scroll out to her with both hands, which was either manners or nervousness, and he said her name before she could pretend she was someone else, and then he stood back and waited with his eyes somewhere past her shoulder, while she broke the seal and read. She read it once. She read it again. The words did not change. By covenant of the Aldenmore Charter, Clause 9, enacted in the third age of the Unified Pack Law, any unmated female who remains in the private sleeping quarters of the Alpha King through the hours of the night, without prior authorized presence, is, by the terms of that covenant, registered as a declared intention of union. The declaration becomes binding at dawn. The dawn had passed. The declaration had been made. A date had been set. The carrier cleared his throat. "The Alpha King's household requests your presence at the palace within 3 days, for the purposes of preparation," he said, and his voice was very careful and very neutral, and she wondered if this was his regular job, or if they had chosen him specifically because he looked like someone who would not flinch. She looked at the scroll. She looked at the carrier. "Is there a response process?" she asked. "There is a response window," the carrier said, "of 1 day. Responses are reviewed by the Covenant Council." She nodded slowly, as if this made sense, as if this was information she was absorbing calmly and processing like a reasonable person. "And if the Covenant Council reviews the response," she said, "what happens then?" "Typically," the carrier said, "the covenant is upheld." She thanked him. She shut the door. She stood in the middle of her kitchen and looked at the scroll in her hand and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite fear and was not quite grief, but was made of parts of all three, pressing outward from somewhere in the center of her chest. The scroll said she was going to marry the Alpha King. The Alpha King, she now knew, was the man who had told her to take the south path. The man who had let her sleep against him until dawn without waking her. The man with the dark eyes and the steady posture and the voice that had said, "You were cold and you are not a threat," as if those were the two relevant facts, as if the situation had a logic he had already solved. She looked at the scroll again. Then she put it on the table and sat down in the chair by the cold fireplace and stared at the wall for a very long time. Outside, the forest was quiet. The festival grounds would be empty now. The tents packed down, the lights gone. The people returned to wherever people like that returned to. The outer settlement road would be muddy from 4 days of rain. The cottage was the same as it always was. 3 rooms, 1 window in the main room that faced north, a fireplace that ate wood, 3 blankets on the bed. The same as always, except for the scroll on the table. She picked it up again. She read the name at the bottom of it, not the carrier's name, not the council's name. A single line at the very bottom, in handwriting that was brief and horizontal, and slightly heavier at the start of each letter than at the end, like a person who began things with intention and then let them taper off. She read the name. Calum. No title. No formal additions. Just the one word. As if that was sufficient. As if anyone who needed to know already knew. She set the scroll back on the table. She stood up and put wood on the fire. And then she stood in front of it while the flames caught, and she thought about what she was going to do, and by the time the wood was burning properly, she had made a decision. She was going to the palace. Not to prepare, not to comply, not to be fitted for a dress she had not chosen, or moved into rooms she had not been asked about, or handed over to a process she had not agreed to. She was going to the palace because she intended to look the Alpha King in the face, the same face that had watched her leave through a tent flap in the gray morning light, and she was going to say, clearly and without dramatics, that whatever covenant had been triggered on whatever night was not something she had done on purpose, and that she expected a reasonable person to understand the difference between intention and accident. She was not afraid of him. She had slept against his chest for most of a night, and he had not woken her, and that was either kindness or calculation, and she was going to find out which one it was. She tied her boots, which were still slightly damp. She picked up the scroll. She left. The palace was not what she had expected. She had expected something cold, something built to impress from a distance and intimidate up close, the kind of structure that exists to remind you of your own smallness. She had passed by the outer walls once, years ago, on a market road that curved near the territory boundary, and from that distance, the palace had looked like all powerful things look from a distance, large, gray, silent. Up close it was different. The gates were heavy iron, yes, and the guards at them were dressed in the kind of uniform that cost more than Lena's cottage, but the stone of the outer walls was old in a way that made it look less like threat and more like permanence, like something that had simply outlasted everything around it, and had no particular feelings about that fact. There was ivy on the east tower. She had not expected ivy. There was a dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight near the guardhouse, and it lifted its head when she approached, and then put it back down again, which seemed like an honest assessment of the situation. She told the gate guard her name. He already knew it. He had been expecting her, which meant the carrier had been efficient, which meant the process she was walking into had been moving on a schedule she had not been consulted about, and that information settled in her chest like a stone she would have to carry for a while. The guard walked her through the main gates, across a courtyard that was larger than her entire settlement block, and into the building through a side door rather than the main entrance. She noted this. She noted everything. The layout of the corridor, the distance from the door to the first corner, the location of windows, the number of people she passed, and whether any of them looked at her directly. Most did not. Those who did had the careful faces of people who had been told something and were managing their reactions to it. She was taken to a receiving room and told to wait. She waited. The room had 3 chairs, a table, and a painting on the wall of a landscape she did not recognize, open hills, and a sky that was either dawn or dusk, impossible to tell. She sat in the chair that faced the door. She held the scroll on her lap. She did not fidget, because fidgeting was something she had trained herself out of in rooms where other people held power, because fidgeting told those people things she did not want them to know. The door opened. It was not the Alpha King. It was a man in his 50s with the careful posture of someone who had spent many years in rooms where posture mattered, and he had a folder in his hands and an expression that was professional and warm in the way that professional warmth usually is, practiced, positioned, designed to make you feel comfortable, without actually making any commitments. "Miss Lena," he said. He had her name too. "Yes," she said. He introduced himself as Aldrich, the head of household coordination, which she understood to mean the person who organized things so that people with more power than he had did not have to organize them themselves. He sat across from her and opened the folder and began to explain the next 3 weeks. She let him talk for 4 minutes. Then she said, "I would like to speak with him." Aldrich paused. "With the Alpha King?" "Yes." The standard process for the covenant preparation period involves a series of... "I understand there is a process," she said. "I would like to speak with him before the process continues." Aldrich looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating a plan that had seemed solid before this moment. She held his gaze without aggression and without apology, because she was not aggressive, and she had nothing to apologize for. "I can convey your request," Aldrich said carefully. "Thank you," she said. He made a note in his folder and stood and excused himself and left, and Lena sat in the chair and looked at the painting of the hills and thought about what she was going to say. She had rehearsed it on the way here. She had a version with 4 points. Structured. Clear. She had a shorter version in case she only got 30 seconds. She had a version that was mostly just 1 sentence, because 1 honest sentence sometimes did what 4 structured points could not. The door opened again 20 minutes later. It was not Aldrich. The man who came through the door was the same man who had told her to take the south path. He was wearing different clothes, darker, better made, the kind of clothes that did not announce themselves because they did not need to. But the build was the same, and the posture was the same, and the eyes were the same, dark, direct, not unkind, not warm. He did not sit down. He stood in the room and looked at her, and she stood up because she could not have the conversation she needed to have from a lower position than his. They looked at each other. "You came yourself," she said. It was not what she had planned to say first. "You asked to see me," he said. "I did. Then here I am." She took a breath. She had the scroll in her hand again. She had not noticed herself picking it up, and she held it out toward him, and he looked at it without moving toward it. "I did not know whose tent that was," she said. "I was cold. I was lost. I did not go in with any kind of plan. I sat down for a moment to get warm, and I fell asleep. And I understand that what that triggered under the charter is. I know what it says. I read it. I'm not disputing the words. I am asking you to consider the fact that an accident is different from an intention, and that a reasonable person could make a distinction between the two." She stopped. He was still looking at her. "The covenant does not distinguish between them," he said. "I know that," she said. "I am asking you to." Silence. The painting on the wall had a bird in it she had not noticed before. Small, in the lower left corner, dark against the pale grass. She fixed on it for a moment while she waited. "The Covenant Council reviewed the record this morning," he said. "The Dawn Watch confirms you were inside through the night. The protocol is clear." "Protocol," she said. The word tasted like something she did not want to eat. "Yes. And you," she said, "as the Alpha King, you have no room to override a protocol that was triggered by a mistake?" "I could override it," he said. She looked at him. Then, "Overriding it," he said, "would require presenting the Covenant Council with an alternative explanation for your presence in the tent, one that falls outside the Charter Clause. The alternatives available to me are limited, and most of them would be worse for you than the Covenant." She stared at him. "Worse how?" she said. He held her gaze. "Trespass into restricted territory during a formal gathering carries a penalty," he said. "The Charter provides 4 options for adjudication. I can describe them to you if you would like, but I will tell you honestly that none of them are better than what the Covenant currently offers you." The room was very quiet. She heard the clock on the wall counting. She heard the distant sound of something being moved in a corridor. Furniture, maybe. Or equipment. The ordinary sounds of a building full of people doing their jobs. "So," she said slowly, "the Covenant is the best available outcome." "For you," he said. "Yes." She laughed. She had not meant to laugh. It came out of her before she could stop it. A short, sharp sound that was not quite humor, and not quite despair, but was something in the middle that did not have a proper name. She pressed her hand to her mouth after the fact. Too late. He did not react. "You are not what I expected," she said, when she had collected herself. "You are exactly what I expected," he said. And there was nothing in his voice that told her if that was a compliment. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the scroll in her hand. Then she looked at the bird in the painting. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he confirmed. "And I am, what, housed here, prepared, arranged?" she said. The word arranged came out with an edge she had not sharpened intentionally. "The household will provide whatever you need," he said. "Aldrich will walk you through the specifics. You are not a prisoner. You are free to move within the palace grounds as you choose. But not to leave," she said. A pause. "It is preferable," he said, "that you do not leave, for your own safety, given the protocols that would otherwise apply." She understood. She was not a prisoner. She was simply in a situation where leaving was technically possible and practically unwise, which was a different kind of confinement, the kind with better walls because you had built them yourself out of the materials available to you. "All right," she said. She said it the way she said things when she had made a decision she did not like, and intended to make work anyway. Flatly, without inflection, the way you set a heavy thing down. He nodded. It was the same nod she had seen before, in the tent. One movement, direct, done. Then he moved toward the door. The south path, she said, before she could stop herself. He paused with his hand on the door frame. You knew the patrol schedule, she said. You knew exactly how much time I had. He looked at her over his shoulder. Yes, he said. You woke up before I did. Yes. And you let me sleep. The pause was 1 second longer than the previous ones. You were cold, he said, and you needed to sleep, and you were not a threat. You keep saying that, she said. It keeps being true, he said. And then he was gone, and the door was closing, and she was alone in the room, with the painting, and the ticking clock, and the scroll she was still holding, and the bird in the lower corner of the landscape, that she could now see clearly, was not flying away from anything. It was simply sitting in the grass. Waiting. Aldrich returned 10 minutes later, with the folder and the kind expression, and began explaining the schedule for the next 3 weeks. She listened carefully. She asked 2 questions, and they were practical ones, about the location of her quarters, and whether she could have access to the outer grounds for walking. Aldrich said yes to both, and wrote it in the folder. She was shown to her quarters by a young woman named Claire, who had bright eyes and a manner that was efficient without being cold. The quarters were on the 3rd floor, 2 rooms, a washroom, a window that faced east. The window was the first thing she checked, the drop to the courtyard below, the angle to the nearest roofline, the distance to the gate. Then she stood in the middle of the room and looked at it all. The bed was large, and had 4 pillows. 4 pillows. She had 2 at home, and one of them had a seam coming apart that she kept meaning to fix. There was a table by the window with a small lamp on it, and a chair that was well made, and looked like it had been chosen by someone who had thought about what a comfortable chair should be. There was a fireplace, with wood already stacked beside it. She stood and looked at all of it, and tried to find the feeling she expected to find, the feeling of being trapped, or wronged, or diminished. She looked for it carefully, the way you look for something you have put down and cannot find. It was not quite there. What was there instead was something she could not name exactly, something quiet and wary, and still half wondering, the feeling of a person who has stepped into a situation they did not expect, and cannot yet see all the edges of. Claire appeared in the doorway. Dinner is at the 7th bell, she said. I can bring it here if you would prefer, or there is a smaller dining room on this floor that... Here, Lena said. Of course, Claire said. Is there anything else you need? Lena looked at the 4 pillows on the bed. No, she said. I think I have everything. Claire left. The door clicked shut gently. Lena took off her coat, still slightly damp at the collar, and sat on the bed and looked at the ceiling, which was higher than any ceiling she had lived under before. She thought about the cottage. She thought about the 3 blankets and the cold mornings and the fire that ate too much wood. She thought about the south path and the old oak and the smell of the road before she saw it. She thought about a man who had woken before her and said nothing and let her sleep. Then she lay back on the 4 pillows and stared at the ceiling until her breath slowed, and then she closed her eyes, and the next thing she knew, Claire was knocking softly at the door with a tray that smelled like soup and bread, and it was the 7th bell, and outside the east window, the sky had gone completely dark. She ate everything on the tray. She had not eaten properly in 2 days. When the tray was empty, she set it by the door, and sat in the good chair by the window, and looked at the palace grounds below, which were lit by iron lanterns along the path that ran between the outer wall and the main building. 2 guards walked the path slowly, not in a hurry, talking to each other about something she could not hear. A kitchen worker crossed from one door to another, carrying a cloth-covered basket. Somewhere above her, a window was open, and she could faintly smell something that might have been lavender. She watched all of it for a long time. She was not, she realized, afraid. She was something else, something more complicated than afraid, less comfortable than calm. She was in a situation she had not chosen, in a building that was not hers, 3 weeks from an event she had not agreed to. and none of this was what she would have picked. But the Alpha King had told her the south path, and he had let her sleep, and when she had stood in front of him with the scroll and said an accident is different from an intention, he had not pretended she was wrong. She did not know yet what any of that added up to. She would have 3 weeks to find out. She got up from the chair and went to the window and looked at the east horizon, where the very first suggestion of something lighter was beginning, at the edge of the dark. Too early for dawn, some kind of pre-dawn shift in the sky that only existed if you were awake to see it. She watched it for a while. Then she went to bed, 4 pillows, no cold. Outside, the rain was not falling. She slept better than she had in months. The palace had a rhythm she learned in the first 3 days. The kitchen staff started before sunrise. She could hear them through the floor of her east-facing room, the dull percussion of pots and the low exchange of voices that meant someone was already working when most of the building was still dark. The guards changed at the 2nd bell, and again at the 7th. The household staff, the ones who cleaned and carried and maintained the invisible systems that kept a building this size functioning, moved in the corridors between the 5th and 8th bells, efficiently and without much conversation. They were good at being present without being noticed, and she respected that, because she had spent most of her life practicing the same thing in different settings. She walked every morning. She did this partly because Aldrich had approved it, and partly because she needed to understand the space she was living in, and the only way to understand a space was to move through it until it stopped feeling foreign. She took the outer path that ran along the east wall first, then the inner garden that sat between the main building and the western outbuildings, then gradually the corridors of the palace itself, the ground floor at first, then the 2nd floor, then the 3rd, which was hers but also contained a series of rooms she had not been told anything about, and which had closed doors with no visible indication of what was behind them. She did not open any of them. Not at first. Claire was her primary contact. Claire was 24, from the southern part of the territory, and had been in palace service since she was 16. She was not a gossip. She answered questions directly, and did not add more than was asked. But she was also not unfriendly. On the 3rd morning she brought Lena's breakfast and stayed a few minutes longer than necessary, and they talked about the east garden, which Lena had asked about, and Claire told her that the roses in the garden were planted in the 2nd year of the current Alpha King's reign, and that nobody on the staff was entirely sure if he had ordered them, or if they had simply arrived one day, and no one had questioned them. "Do they ask him about things like that?" Lena said. "The staff?" Claire said. "Not usually." "What about the council, his advisors?" "They ask him things," Claire said carefully, "but mostly about territory and allocation and security. The roses are outside that category." Lena looked out the window at the garden below. "He doesn't seem like a rose person," she said. Claire's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "No," she said, "he doesn't." On the 5th day, Aldrich came with the first fitting for the ceremony. The woman who came with him was a dressmaker named Greta, who had the brisk, no-waste manner of someone who made things with her hands, and had no patience for feelings about those things. She measured Lena with the detached efficiency of a person who found measurements more interesting than the people they were attached to, and she showed Lena 3 fabrics without comment, and when Lena said she did not have a preference, Greta picked one herself, and wrote something in her notebook, and that was effectively that. "Whose dress was it going to be?" Lena asked, as Greta was packing up. Greta looked at her. "The original dress," Lena said. "The one for this occasion. There was a wedding expected before. That dress was completed 4 years ago," Greta said. "It is no longer relevant." She said it the way someone says something they have said before, with the careful brevity of a word that has been chosen after a longer version was found to cause more problems than it solved. "For whom?" Lena asked. "That is not a current matter," Greta said, and picked up her bag and left. Aldrich, who had been watching this exchange from the doorway, stepped further into the room. His folder was in his hands, as always, and he looked at the carpet, rather than at her. "There was someone," Lena said. "There is a lot of history in this palace," Aldrich said. He said it kindly, but not informatively. And she let it go. For now. On the 7th day, she met the council. There were 5 of them. They gathered in a formal meeting room on the ground floor, and received her with the practiced neutrality of people who had made up their minds before the meeting and were going through the formality of the meeting because the form required it. They asked her 3 questions about her background and lineage, her pack origin, her family name, her prior arrangements, and she answered all 3 truthfully, which she knew would work against her in a building where low rank carried weight. She had no family name worth noting. Her pack origin was the outer settlement, which was the polite term for the boundary communities that the inner territory tolerated without supporting. Her prior arrangements were exactly what the phrase implied. Nothing prior, nothing arranged. The council member at the center of the table, an older woman named Hesper who had the deliberate stillness of someone who had been in rooms of power for longer than the furniture, looked at her with eyes that were measuring rather than hostile. The Covenant selection, Hesper said, has, in the past, produced unexpected outcomes. I imagine it has, Lena said. Unexpected outcomes have, in the past, been managed. Managed, Lena repeated. The process provides structures, Hesper said. There are expectations for the period before the ceremony, and for the arrangement itself. Compliance with these expectations is generally in everyone's interest. I understand compliance, Lena said. I have spent my whole life understanding compliance. I am very good at it. She paused. I am asking you to tell me which parts of the expectations are genuinely required, and which parts are conventional. Hesper looked at her for a moment. Most things are both, Hesper said. Most things, Lena said. Not all things. Another pause. Then Hesper wrote something on the paper in front of her, and the meeting shifted to procedural matters, and Lena sat with the posture she had practiced for years, in rooms where people decided things about her, and she watched the 5 faces and catalogued what she learned. She learned that 3 of the 5 were skeptical of her. She learned that one of them, a man on the left end of the table, young for the council, with the watchful look of someone who had not been in his position long enough to be comfortable in it, was not skeptical so much as curious. And she learned that Hesper was neither skeptical nor curious, but simply waiting to see what kind of person Lena would turn out to be. Fair enough. She was waiting to find out the same thing. On the 8th day she found the corridor. She had not been looking for it. She had been looking for the east garden from the inside. There was a door somewhere on the 2nd floor that Claire had mentioned led to a covered walkway above the garden, and Lena had been trying to find it without asking, because finding things herself was how she learned a space, and she turned a corner at the end of the 2nd floor east corridor, and found that the corridor continued past the corner, but changed character. The floor was the same stone, but there was a thick carpet runner that the rest of the hall lacked, and the ceiling was slightly higher, and there were no lamps in the brackets on the wall. The brackets were there, but the lamps had been removed, leaving iron holders with nothing in them. At the end of this darker corridor was a door. It was a plain door, no marking, no symbol, nothing on it to indicate what it contained, but there was something about it that she registered before she could explain why. The quality of the silence around it was different. Rooms that were simply empty had one kind of silence. This room had another kind, a heavier silence, a quieter one, the silence of a space that had been sealed against the outside for long enough that the air inside had gone still. She stood in the corridor and looked at the door. She did not touch it. She went back to the main hall and found the East Garden walkway 20 minutes later, which was where Claire had said it was, and she had simply missed the turning because she had been paying attention to the wrong wall. She did not tell Claire about the door in the corridor, but she went back to look at it the next day, and the day after that. On the 11th day, Calum came to the garden. She was sitting on the low bench near the rose beds, which were past their summer peak but still had enough blooms on them to make the air around them particular and sharp. She had a book. Aldrich had asked if she wanted books, and she had said yes, and 3 days later, a stack of 8 had appeared in her room, which told her something about how the palace worked and who had chosen them, because the books were an interesting selection, better than she would have expected, with a range she would not have guessed from the outside. She was reading and not reading, holding the book open and thinking about the door at the end of the dark corridor, running through what she knew, which was very little, and what she could reasonably ask, which was also very little, when she heard footsteps on the garden path and looked up. He was in plainer clothes again. She had noticed that about him. He wore nothing that announced itself, nothing that required you to look at it. He moved without flourish, in a building full of people who had developed, over years of proximity to power, a talent for small performances of importance. He did not perform. He stopped a few feet from the bench. He looked at the roses rather than at her. "The south beds are better," he said, "later in the season." "I'm here now," she said. "Not later in the season." A pause. "How are you settling?" he asked. It sounded like a question he had decided to ask, rather than one that had come naturally. "Fine," she said. And then, "No, that's not accurate. I am managing. Settling implies I have decided to be here. I haven't decided that yet. I am present, and I am thinking, and I am observing things, and when I have observed enough, I will make a decision about settling." He looked at her then, properly, the way he had in the receiving room. "What have you observed?" he said. She considered. She considered. "The staff are loyal," she said. "Not afraid. Loyal, which is different, and harder to build. The grounds are well maintained, but not excessively so. There is practical attention here, rather than decorative attention. The council is cautious about me, which is appropriate. Aldrich is efficient and kind, which is a rare combination. And someone planted roses in the second year of your reign, and you have not had them removed, which means either you like them, or you are loyal to whatever decision was made about them." He looked at the roses. "The latter," he said. There was something in the way he said it, quiet and even, and not elaborating. That was its own kind of opening. She did not push through it. She filed it with the door in the dark corridor, and the word prior that Greta had used, and with the handwriting she had not yet seen. "I have a question," she said. "Ask it." The corridor on the second floor, east wing, past the lamp brackets that have no lamps. At the end of it, there is a room with a closed door. I would like to know about it. Silence. She watched his face, and it did not change, which was itself information. He had not been surprised. He had been waiting, she thought, for her to arrive at this question. Not today necessarily, but eventually. "It is not a room you need to concern yourself with," he said. "I am not concerned," she said. "I am curious. Those are different things." Another pause. "Yes," he said. "They are." He did not answer her question, but he also did not leave. He stood in the garden and looked at the rose beds, and she sat on the bench and looked at her book, and they were quiet together for several minutes, in a way that did not feel hostile or comfortable, but felt like something in between, like two people who are both very careful, sitting in the same space, and noticing that the other one is also very careful, and finding that fact unexpectedly tolerable. "The south beds," she said eventually. "What blooms there later in the season?" And he told her. He knew the garden better than she had expected. He named species she did not know, and described colors with a specificity that surprised her, and he did not look at her while he talked about it. He looked at the beds themselves, moving his gaze slowly from section to section, the way a person looks at something they have looked at many times before, and have not grown tired of. She put the book down and listened. When he finished, she said, "You come here often." "When the schedule allows," he said. "What happens in the schedule that doesn't allow it?" He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Everything else," he said. She nodded. He left a few minutes later. She watched him go down the path toward the main building, and then looked at the roses, and thought about the fact that a man had planted them, or authorized them, or permitted them to stay, and that the same man had told her the south path, and let her sleep, and stood in a garden, and named species she did not know. She was starting to build a picture. She did not know yet if she liked what she was looking at. On the 13th day, the midpoint of the 3 weeks, Claire came to her room in the morning with a tray, and a slightly different expression than usual. "There was a messenger from the Eastern Ridge last night," Claire said. She said it carefully, the way you say things, when you are telling someone something without being entirely sure you should. "Trouble?" Lena said. "Increased movement along the boundary," Claire said. "Nothing confirmed, but the council has been in session since the 4th bell." Lena looked out the east window at the pale morning sky. "Is he in there?" she said. "In the session?" "Yes," Claire said. She ate her breakfast by the window, and watched the day beginning, and thought about boundaries, and movements, and what lived on the other side of them. She thought about the outer settlement, which was itself a kind of boundary, a line someone had drawn to separate the territory from what they were not prepared to include. She had lived on that line for 22 years, inside it just enough to be subject to its rules, and outside it just enough to be forgotten about when the rules distributed their benefits. She knew something about what it meant when things moved along a boundary. She got dressed and went downstairs, not to the council room. She had no standing there, she understood that. But to the small room adjacent to it, where the maps were kept. She had found the maps 6 days ago, and had been studying them quietly ever since. Not because she had a plan, but because maps were how she thought, and she needed to think. She found the Eastern Ridge maps, and spread them on the table, and looked at them for a long time. There was a movement pattern here. She could see it, not in any single piece of information, but in the aggregate, in the shape of the terrain, and the placement of the settlements, and the history of where trouble had come from before, which the older maps showed clearly, if you knew how to read them. She sat with the maps, until the light in the room changed, and then she rolled them back up and replaced them, and went back to her room, and sat in the good chair, and looked at the east horizon. The picture she was building had gained another piece. She was not sure yet where it fit, but she was becoming more certain that it fit somewhere. The key was in a small dish on the washroom shelf. She had not noticed it for 4 days. It sat among other small objects, a ceramic button, a coin from a region she did not recognize, a folded piece of cloth, and it was so unremarkable that her eyes had passed over it every morning, without registering it as significant. On the 14th day she picked it up and looked at it properly. It was old, not decorative old, not made to look aged, genuinely old, with the smoothed edges of a key that had been handled for many years, the metal worn in the specific places that corresponded to a person's grip. It was small, the kind of key for an interior room rather than an exterior gate, and it was not labeled in any way. She held it for a moment. Then she put it back in the dish. She went to breakfast. She spoke to Claire about the East Garden. She spent an hour in the library on the ground floor, reading about the history of the charter, which was a thing she had decided to do after the council meeting, because the charter had run her life without her consent, and she thought she might as well understand it properly. The history was dull in the way that official histories are dull, precise and complete, and deliberately evacuated of anything that might have been interesting. But between the official language, there were things she could read if she knew how to look. The Covenant Clause, for instance, was not original to the charter. It had been added 200 years after the charter's founding, during a period of significant political instability, when several important alliances had collapsed, and the Territory Council at the time had been looking for ways to stabilize the line of succession and the formal arrangements of the ruling house. The clause had been, in other words, a solution to a problem, a legal structure designed to ensure that certain kinds of connections could be formalized quickly, before political opponents could interfere. It was not, as she had assumed, simply a tradition. It was a piece of machinery that someone had built for a purpose, and it had kept running long after the purpose had been resolved, the way machinery sometimes did when nobody switched it off. She sat with that for a while. Then she went back to her room and picked up the key. She told herself she was going for a walk. She took her usual morning route through the second floor, east wing corridor, and she turned the corner past the empty lamp brackets, and she walked to the end of the corridor, and she stood in front of the closed door. The keyhole was the right size. She did not hesitate. If she hesitated, she would talk herself out of it, and she did not want to be talked out of it, because she was in this palace against her will, and she was learning everything she could about it, and about the man she was going to marry in 9 days. And this door was a fact that he had declined to explain, and that declined fact was now sitting with every other piece of information she had been collecting, and she needed to know what it was. The key fit. The lock turned with the resistance of something unused, a dry, slow turn, and then the mechanism released, and the door swung inward. The room was small, smaller than she expected. It was not a storage room and not a bedroom and not an office. It was something without a clear category, a room that had been used for a particular kind of living that was specific and personal and unlike anything she could have named from the outside. There was a chair by the window, angled toward the light. There was a low shelf with books on it, some standing and some lying flat, organized in a way that was not alphabetical, and not by size but by something else, by use, maybe, or by feeling, the kind of organization that only makes sense to the person who made it. There was a writing desk. On the desk, there was a cup with dried flowers in it, not decorative dried flowers, not intentionally preserved. just flowers that had been put in water, and then the water had gone, and they had dried where they stood, brown and fragile, and still shaped like something living. Beside the cup was a book, lying open, face down, the way you put a book down when you intend to come back to it. The book had a mark on its cover, not the title, something else, a small drawing in ink of a shape she could not immediately identify. She looked at it for a moment. A bird, maybe, or a leaf, something small and simple that a person had drawn while thinking about something else. She did not touch the book. She looked at the walls. The drawings were pinned at different heights, not arranged for display. The heights suggested a person who had pinned them at whatever height was comfortable in the moment, standing or sitting or reaching. They were done in pencil and ink, and they were good, better than a child's drawings in technique, but with the subject matter of a child, animals mostly, and the garden, and one drawing of the palace gate seen from inside, the perspective oddly small, the gate very large, the courtyard empty. And in the margins of the open book on the desk there was writing. She could see it from where she was standing. She did not move closer, but she could read the first line of it, written in ink, along the top margin in handwriting, that leaned slightly, as if the person who wrote it was comfortable and unhurried. He is afraid of the quiet, so I fill it for him. Lena stood very still. She read the line 3 more times. Then she heard the footstep in the corridor behind her. A single footstep, coming from the turning past the lamp brackets, and she turned around. Calum was in the doorway. He was not angry. That was the first thing she registered, braced for it as she was. He was not angry, and he was not cold, and he was not any of the things she had prepared herself for in the half-second between hearing the footstep and turning to face it. He was. She did not have a word for what he was. The expression on his face was one she had not seen him use yet. Not guarded, not neutral, not direct. Something that was trying to be neutral, and was not quite getting there. He looked at the room. "I found the key," she said. "In the washroom. I assumed it was left there." She did not apologize. She held his gaze, and did not apologize, because she had not done anything she was ashamed of, and apology would have been a performance rather than honesty. "It was," he said. She blinked. "Left there," he said, deliberately. Silence. "By whom?" she said. "Claire knows the rooms," he said. She would have noticed it was in the dish. Lena looked at him. She thought about Claire's expression over the past 2 weeks. The small adjustments, the slightly longer conversations, the way she had described the roses and the walkway and the south garden, with a specificity that was not strictly necessary for household communication. "You told her to leave it," Lena said. He did not answer, but he did not disagree. She turned back to the room, to the pinned drawings and the open book and the dried flowers in the cup on the desk. "Who was she?" Lena said. The silence was longer this time. "Her name was Mara," he said. His voice was exactly the same as it always was, even, controlled, but there was something different about the way he said the name, something she could not define, except to say it was the difference between reading a word off a page and saying a word you have said many times in private. "She died," Lena said. 6 years ago, he said, in the winter. She did not ask how. She had promised herself months ago, years ago really, a lesson learned from her own losses, that she would never ask how without permission, because how was the part that cost the most to give. "You left the room," she said instead. "Sealed it." "Yes." "And left it." "Yes." "The key was in the dish," she said, not accusingly, just noting it. "Yes," he said again. Lena looked at the book on the desk, at the handwriting in the margin. "He is afraid of the quiet, so I fill it for him." She thought about all the things she had been noticing over 2 weeks. His posture in empty rooms, the way he moved through the palace, as if he were slightly too careful of the space around him. The garden conversation, where he had talked about rose species, with the ease of someone who needed to be talking about something. The session she had not been invited to but which Claire had mentioned quietly. The way he had appeared in the garden at the same time she was there, and had stood at a careful distance and looked at everything except her. She thought about a man who was afraid of the quiet. "She would have liked you," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the room, at the drawings, at the open book, at the dried flowers, not at her. His face had the expression of someone who has said something true and is now sitting with the fact of having said it. She did not know what to do with it. She turned it over. She held it the way she sometimes held things that were heavy, carefully, with both hands, making sure she understood the weight before she decided where to put it down. Then she looked back at the book on the desk and the line she had read. "She knew you well," Lena said. "Yes," he said. "She did." They stood in the room for another moment, the two of them and the 6-year-old quiet of it, and neither of them spoke, and that was fine, because some spaces do not need to be filled. She walked past him into the corridor. She pulled the door closed behind her gently, not shut, not locked, just resting in the frame. He did not follow her immediately. She walked back through the corridor, past the empty lamp brackets, around the corner into the main second-floor hall where the light came in from the north windows, and the palace resumed being itself, busy, organized, populated with people who had purposes and schedules, and no time for standing in old rooms. She kept walking. She went down to the east garden and sat on the low bench in the pale afternoon light, and put her hands in her lap and looked at the rose beds, which were past their peak now, most of the blooms going brown at the edges, the petals starting to fall in the wind that came down off the hills to the north. "The south beds are better," he had said. Later in the season. She was here now, not later in the season. She thought about Mara, who had left handwriting in the margins of books and drawings, pinned at various heights, and dried flowers in a cup. She thought about Mara, who had known a man who was afraid of the quiet, and had filled it for him. She thought about what it meant that the room had been sealed for 6 years, and the key had appeared in a small dish on a washroom shelf 14 days after Lena arrived. She thought about the roses that had appeared in the 2nd year of his reign, and that no one had questioned. She thought about a lot of things, sitting there in the late afternoon, with the wind coming off the hills and the petals falling, and she did not reach any conclusions. But she was building a picture, and the picture was becoming clearer, line by line, in the way that pictures always become clearer when you are patient and you pay attention. Claire found her there when the light was going. "Dinner," Claire said. "I'll come down tonight," Lena said, the main dining room. Claire's expression did not change, but something in it settled, a very small adjustment, the kind that meant a thing had been resolved that she had been wondering about. "7th bell," Claire said. "Yes," Lena said. She went upstairs and changed her clothes, and sat for a moment in front of the east window, looking at the first stars appearing. Then she looked at the small dish on the washroom shelf. The key was still there. She looked at it for a moment. Then she left it where it was. The main dining room was larger than the one on her floor, and had a long table and 8 chairs, most of which were empty when she arrived at the 7th bell. There were 2 other people already seated, a man she recognized as one of the council members, the young one, watchful, who had been more curious than skeptical, and a woman she had not seen before, older, with the weathered look of someone who spent a great deal of time outdoors, and did not apologize for it. Calum arrived 3 minutes after Lena. He stopped briefly when he came through the door, and registered her presence with a stillness that lasted less than a second, and then resolved into the same controlled expression as usual. He sat at the head of the table. She sat 2 seats down on the left side, which was not the closest seat available and not the farthest, and which she had chosen on purpose. The councilman introduced himself as Owen. The outdoor woman was called Bram, which Lena noted without reacting to, because names were their own business. Dinner was served. It was a quiet meal, and then not entirely quiet. Owen had opinions about the Eastern Ridge situation and shared them with careful precision. Bram had fewer words and more certainty. Calum listened to both of them and said little, which she was beginning to understand was not absence but attention. He was the kind of person who gathered information in groups and processed it afterward, alone, which was possibly why he was afraid of the quiet, because the quiet was where he did his heaviest work, and heaviest work was the kind that cost something. She did not offer her opinions about the Eastern Ridge. She listened, and she ate, and she watched the 3 of them navigate around each other with the ease of people who had worked together for some time, and had developed the shorthand of that. And once, during a pause in the conversation, she looked up and found Calum looking at her. Not at the table, not at his food, at her. The look lasted 2 seconds, and then he looked at Owen, who was continuing a point about the Third Ridge Road. Lena looked back at her plate. Her heart was doing something she chose not to examine closely. She finished dinner. She said goodnight to Owen and Bram, who were cordial without being warm, which was appropriate for a first meal. She said goodnight to Calum, who said it back in the same even voice he said everything in. She went upstairs. She lay in the bed with the 4 pillows and looked at the high ceiling. The key was in the dish. The room was unlocked. The handwriting was in the book's margin, and the drawings were on the wall, and the flowers had dried in the cup years ago, and a man had said she would have liked you with the voice of someone who had not said that name out loud in a long time. She stared at the ceiling. Outside the east window, the night was very clear. She could hear the guards on the path below, their footsteps slow and steady, and somewhere further off an owl in the north wood, calling once and then falling quiet. She thought about quiet. She thought about what it meant to fill it, and what it meant to need it filled, and whether those two things were a kind of balance, or just a kind of longing in 2 different shapes. She did not reach a conclusion. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes. 9 days until the ceremony. 9 days to figure out what kind of person she was going to be in it. He came to her door at midnight. Not a knock, exactly. More of a sound. A single deliberate tap, quiet enough that it could have been something else. Could have been a branch against the wall, or a shift in the building's night settling. But she was awake. She had been awake for an hour, lying in the dark with the east window letting in the cold October air, and her mind refusing to stop its cataloging. And she heard it, and knew immediately what it was. She sat up. She waited. The sound came again. 2 taps this time. Definite. She got out of bed. She pulled her coat over her sleep clothes, because the floor was cold, and the corridor would be colder, and she crossed to the door and opened it. He was standing exactly on the other side of the threshold. Not in the room. At the line of it, the wooden lip of the doorframe, the precise edge of the interior space. He was dressed in his day clothes still, which meant he had not slept, which meant he had been up since the morning, and had apparently decided at some point in the middle of the night that this was necessary. She looked at him. He looked at her. "There is a security concern," he said, "from the eastern ridge. The watch changed 15 minutes ago, and the perimeter sweep is starting in 4 minutes. Given your current status, I am required to account for your location during all security events." "Required," she said. "Yes. You are standing at my door in the middle of the night to comply with a security protocol." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. The lamp in the corridor bracket, there were lamps in this part of the hall, unlike the corridor near Mara's room, cast a thin light that showed the edges of his face, without quite illuminating it. She could see the line of his jaw, and the set of his shoulders, and the fact that his hands were at his sides, open, not tense. "That is," she said, "the most formal thing anyone has ever done in the middle of the night at my door." His expression shifted, barely, just the corner of something, and she recognized it now as the thing she had been trying to name since the garden. Not quite a smile, not built the way a smile is built, but a response in the same family. A response to something that was a little bit funny, and a little bit true. "I should warn you," she said, "I have not been sleeping, so if you would like to present the full security briefing, I have time." "That is not necessary," he said. "I didn't think so," she said. Silence. She leaned against the doorframe, not dramatically, just shifting her weight to one side, in the manner of a person who is comfortable and not planning to move. He stayed where he was. "The Eastern Ridge movement," she said. "Is it serious?" "It is being assessed. Owen thinks the third road is the vulnerability." He looked at her. "You heard that at dinner." "I listen at dinner," she said. "I also looked at the maps in the records room, the ones from the 3rd and 4th age surveys." A pause. "You found the records room," he said. "On the 9th day," she said. "The 3rd age maps are in the lower cabinet on the left. They are not well organized, which is unfortunate because they contain information that the 4th age maps do not." He was still looking at her with the careful attention he gave things he was reassessing. "What information?" he said. "The 3rd Ridge Road has 2 branches," she said. "The current maps show one. The survey from the 3rd age shows that the eastern branch was deliberately covered, filled with rock and brush, about 140 years ago, because there was a conflict, and the road made movement too easy in a direction that was not advantageous. The fill has had 140 years of weather on it. I do not know the current condition, but if someone knew the eastern branch existed and wanted to move along the ridge without being seen from the standard watch positions, that is the route I would use. She said it plainly. Not performing confidence, not performing authority. Just saying it, the way she said things she had actually looked at and thought about. Calum was very still. "You are certain of this?" he said. "I am certain the maps exist," she said. "I am certain the road is shown in the Third Age survey. What it looks like now I cannot tell you. I have not been to the eastern ridge." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Where did you learn to read survey maps?" She looked at the wall past his shoulder for a brief moment. "I grew up near the eastern boundary," she said. "Not the ridge itself, the outer settlement below it. We did not have good maps. We worked with what we had." She had said it the way she always said things about her childhood, informatively, without drama, closing the door on the emotional content before it could get in. He did not push it open. "I will have Owen look at the Third Age surveys in the morning," he said. "The lower cabinet," she said. "Left side. The survey is in the third roll from the bottom, tied with a blue ribbon that has gone gray." "Gray ribbon," he said, and she could hear that he was memorizing it. "Yes." Another silence. This one was different in quality from the earlier ones, less gap, more presence. She was aware of the sound of the palace around them, the distant footstep of the midnight watch on the floor above, the creak of something settling in the walls, the very faint sound of wind against glass from the corridor window to her left. "You should sleep," he said. "I was trying," she said. "Hence the being awake." "Does the room not suit?" "The room is excellent," she said. "It is my head that doesn't suit." He looked at her with the directness she had come to recognize as his natural mode. Not invasive, just honest, the gaze of someone who looked at things the way they were, rather than the way it was comfortable to see them. "What is your head doing?" he said. It was not the question she expected. She answered it anyway. "It is making lists," she said. "Things I know, things I do not know, things I can infer, things I cannot, things that are going to happen in 9 days, and what I should think about them. Things that have already happened, that I have not fully accounted for yet." "Such as?" he said. She looked at him. "The key in the dish," she said. He held her gaze. "Claire would have placed it there, if she thought it was relevant," he said carefully. "Claire places things where she is asked to place them," Lena said, "or where she is permitted to place them, which is not the same as Claire making independent decisions about what I should find." He said nothing. "You could have told me about the room yourself," she said. "You could have explained it directly. Instead, it arrived as a key, in a dish, on a shelf in a washroom, which requires me to notice it, and then identify it, and then decide whether to use it, and then live with whatever I find when I do." She was not accusing him. She was describing what had happened as accurately as she could. "Yes," he said. "Why?" she said. The pause this time was longer than any she had timed so far. "Because I did not know," he said, "whether to show you something like that or to let you find it, and I did not trust myself to show it in a way that was—" He stopped. Started again. "Mara always said, I explained things badly, that I prepared people for information, the way you prepare a room for winter. Closed everything off and left them in the cold." Lena looked at him. "She was right," he said. "It was not self-pity. It was just the truth," said the way he said true things, directly, without decoration. "You were trying to do better," Lena said. "I was trying," he said, "to do it differently. I do not know if it was better." She thought about the key in the dish. The gray ribbon, on the Third Age survey, and the south path, and the old oak, and the smell of the road before you see it. A man who prepared information in the wrong ways, and knew it, and was trying different ways. "It worked," she said, "for what it is worth." He looked at something past her shoulder for a moment, then back. "The perimeter sweep will have passed now," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should try to sleep." "I know." He did not move immediately. He stood in the corridor at the exact line of the threshold, hands at his sides, with the lamp casting thin light across the planes of his face, and she leaned against the doorframe in her coat over her sleep clothes, and neither of them moved for a moment. "Will you look at the eastern branch tomorrow?" she said, "on the map, whether it could still be passable." "Yes," he said. "And if it is, will you?" "Yes," he said, before she finished. She looked at him. "You didn't let me finish," she said. "You were going to ask if we would adjust the watch positioning to account for the eastern approach," he said. "The answer is yes." She looked at him for another moment. "Then, I was going to ask if you were going to tell me what you found," she said. "But yes, the watch positioning as well." He was quiet for a second. "I will tell you," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Good night, Lena," he said. And she noticed, the way she had noticed the lamp brackets and the key and the handwriting in the margin and the roses in the second year of his reign, she noticed that it was the first time he had used her name. Not Miss, not a formal address. Just her name, said simply, at the end of a sentence, at midnight, in a palace corridor, before he turned and walked away down the hall, with the same unhurried gait he always had, not looking back. She closed the door. She stood in the middle of her room. She thought about what it meant that her heart was doing that thing again, the thing she had declined to examine closely the last time, which she was still declining to examine closely now, because examining it would mean deciding what to do about it, and she was not ready to decide what to do about it. She went to the window instead, and stood in the cold air coming off the hills, and looked at the dark. 9 days. In 9 days she would stand in a room with people who had not asked her, and a man who had said her name for the first time at midnight outside her door, and she would participate in a covenant she had triggered by accident during a night that had begun with rain and cold and a wrong turn in the woods. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she went to bed. She thought she would not sleep. She slept within 10 minutes, and this time she did not dream about anything in particular, just the ordinary darkness of a full night's rest. And when she woke, the east window showed gray dawn, and the first sound from the kitchen below had already started, and she lay there for a moment, before she got up and registered that the things she had been carrying in her chest since the council meeting, and the records room, and the corridor, and the dinner, and the door at midnight had changed weight. Not lighter. Not heavier either. Just different. Changed in the way things change when you have looked at them long enough to understand them slightly better than you did. She got up. She washed her face in the cold water from the basin. She dressed. She went to the records room, which opened at the 6th bell, and she took out 3 more third-age survey maps, and spread them on the table, and looked at them in the thin morning light, and she made notes in her own handwriting, in a small book she had asked Claire for on her 3rd day, because she always wrote things down when she was thinking hard, because writing made the thinking hold still long enough to examine. She made notes. She looked at the maps. She thought about what it meant to know terrain that other people had forgotten, and what that knowledge was worth when it was needed. She thought she might be about to find out. The council convened again at the 5th bell. She heard about it through Claire, who mentioned it without commentary, and who had developed, over the past 2 weeks, a fine instinct for what information Lena found useful, and what she did not. The Eastern Ridge movement had stabilized overnight, no further advance, no withdrawal, just presence along the boundary, like a question that had been asked, and was still waiting for an answer. She asked Claire if she could sit in on the briefing. Claire said she would ask Aldrich. Aldrich said he would convey the request. 2 hours passed. Then a runner came from the council corridor and said the Alpha King had indicated she was welcome at the briefing if she wished to attend. She noted the phrasing, welcome, if she wished, not summoned, not expected. The distinction was deliberate, and she appreciated it. The briefing was dry and dense, and full of the specific shorthand of people who had been working together for years. Abbreviations she did not know. References to prior events she had to piece together from context. She sat at the side of the room, not at the table, and she listened and did not interrupt, because she was here to learn the current situation, and not to demonstrate what she already knew, and those were different purposes that required different behavior. Owen ran the briefing. He was good at it, organized, precise, with the ability to hold 7 different threads of information simultaneously, and report on each without losing the others. She watched him work and thought about what it took to build that kind of capacity, and whether it came from training, or from necessity, or from the particular combination of the two, that produced the most durable skills. Calum sat at the head of the table and listened. She watched him listen. It was something she had been observing for 2 weeks and still found interesting. The quality of his attention. And he looked at the person speaking, and he looked at the materials on the table, and occasionally he made a note, and everything about the set of his body suggested that he was taking everything in without deciding anything yet. Other people in the room made small movements that showed their reactions. A slight nod, a shift in posture, a hand moved toward a paper and then away. He did not do that. He was still in the way that meant his processing was happening elsewhere, internally, not on his face. She thought about the note in the margin. He is afraid of the quiet, so I fill it for him. She looked at the room. 8 people talking, papers being moved, Owen's controlled voice cycling through the briefing points. And she thought about what it meant to be afraid of the quiet, when you were also a person who processed in stillness, who needed to be still to think, but could not stay in the stillness alone. It was the kind of contradiction that was entirely recognizable. She had her own version of it. After the briefing, Owen asked if anyone had additional information to contribute. 3 people spoke briefly. Then the room looked at her, because she was the new element in it, and new elements were noted, and she said, "Nothing to add at this time, because that was accurate, and also because the thing she had to add was not yet ready to be added. And saying something before it was ready was one of the most reliable ways she knew to have it ignored." After the briefing, she walked to the East Wing corridor and went to stand outside the door of Mara's room for a few minutes. She did not go in. She just stood in the dim corridor and looked at the closed door and thought about a woman who had filled the quiet for someone who was afraid of it, and who had been gone for 6 years, and whose absence was still present in the building, in the ways that real absences were, not loudly, not in any one place, but distributed through everything, a kind of weight in the walls. She thought about what it meant to come after something like that. Not to replace it, not to pretend it was not there, to come after it as yourself, as a separate person, with your own terrain and your own maps, and to figure out what it meant to be in this place, as what you actually were. She stood in the corridor and thought about this. Then she went back to the records room and read for another hour, and then she went to bed, and she lay in the dark and listened to the palace settling around her, and she thought about the gray ribbon and the eastern branch, and the particular patience of terrain that holds its secrets until someone takes the time to read it properly. The morning of the ceremony arrived the way mornings arrived regardless of what they were scheduled to contain, without ceremony of their own, gray and ordinary at the window, with the kitchen sounds starting below and the east sky taking its time, going from black to blue. Lena lay in bed and watched the window. She had slept well, which surprised her, and she had woken 5 minutes before Claire's knock, which was her usual pattern when something significant was going to happen, her body tending to resolve its own anxiety before she was conscious enough to remember what she was anxious about. She lay there in the gray light, and breathed, and thought about what today was, and what it was not. It was a ceremony. It was a ritual, conducted in a large room by officiants who had presided over such things many times, and who had a procedure for it. And the procedure would be followed, because procedures were what the charter ran on, and she would be part of it, and it would be finished by midday. It was not a choice. It was also not, she had decided somewhere in the previous 9 days, a defeat. A defeat was what happened when you lost something you had tried to keep. She had not tried to keep this specific future she was walking away from, the quiet life in the outer settlement cottage, the cold mornings, and the 3 blankets, and the 11 days alone. She had been taken from it without asking. That was a different kind of loss, and it required a different kind of response. And the response she had arrived at, after 9 days of maps and corridors and garden conversations, and a midnight door and a key in a dish, was not grief, and was not acceptance exactly, but was something that lived between the two. A decision to be present in what was happening, and to pay attention, and to find out what it actually was, before she decided how she felt about it. Claire knocked. "Come in," Lena said. Claire came in with the tray, and set it on the table by the window, and then stood with the particular stillness of someone who was waiting to say something they had been thinking about. "Say it," Lena said. Claire's expression shifted to something more direct than her usual efficiency. "I have worked in this palace for 8 years," she said. "I have seen the people who come through it, and the people who stay in it, and the people who cannot manage either. I want you to know." She stopped, started again. "The dress Greta made is not the one we expected you to need. But Greta made it for you, and she is not a person who puts care into things she does not believe in." Lena looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Claire nodded, once, and then her professional efficiency was back and she poured the tea and left Lena to eat in the window light. The dress was delivered at the 8th bell by Greta herself, which was apparently not standard. Usually the delivery was made by her assistant, but Greta came in person and stood at the edge of the room while Lena put it on, and she adjusted 2 things at the back with quick, precise hands, and then she stood back and looked at it. The fabric was deep blue, almost green in certain lights, the color of the East Garden just before dusk, when the light went horizontal and the shadows went long. It was simply cut, not elaborate. It did not announce itself. But it was made with the kind of attention that made itself felt in the wearing, in the way it sat and moved, and did not require adjustment or attention, as if it had been designed to allow the person inside it to simply be inside it. "Well," Greta said, and that was all, and she left. Lena stood in front of the small mirror on the washroom wall. It was not a big mirror, it had not been designed for this, and looked at herself for a moment. Then she went to the east window and looked at the garden below. The roses were fully done now. All the blooms were brown and gone. The beds were bare-looking, the canes stripped, waiting for winter. In spring the south beds would be better, he had said. She thought about that for a moment. Then she thought, she would be here in spring. That was a new thought. She had not, until this moment, let herself think that far forward. She had been operating in 3-week units, in 9-day units, in the incremental space of each day as it arrived. But spring was real. Spring was after winter, and winter was coming, and she would still be here when it came and when it went, and the south beds would bloom, and she would be in a position to see them. She held that thought carefully. It was not the terrible thing she had been bracing for it to be. She left her room at the 9th bell when Aldrich came for her. He walked beside her through the 3rd-floor corridor and down the main staircase and through the formal hall on the ground floor that she had only been in once before, when she arrived, and which was now different, not larger, not changed, just occupied in a way it had not been when she first passed through it. The people standing at the edges of it were dressed formally and arranged in the manner of people who had been told where to stand and had stood there. She recognized Owen and Bram. She recognized Hesper, standing near the front, with the still deliberateness she always had, waiting. She did not look at any of them closely. She looked at the room, the height of the ceiling, the light from the tall windows on the west side, the stone floor with its seams worn smooth, the age of everything around her, the way 200 years of these proceedings had worn pathways in the space itself, grooves of habit and repetition that held the shape of every ceremony that had passed through them. She had her chin up. Not because someone had told her to, not as performance or defiance or an announcement, simply because it was her chin, and it belonged to her, and if she was walking through this, she was going to walk through it with her face forward. And the small, unremarkable act of keeping her chin level was the only thing at this moment that felt like something she had chosen, rather than been given. Calum was already at the front of the room. He was wearing dark clothes, no uniform, no formal regalia, nothing that made a show of itself, consistent with every other choice she had seen him make in clothing since she arrived. He was standing with his hands at his sides, and he was looking at her as she walked down the length of the hall, not at the room, at her. She held his gaze because she was not going to look at the floor, and the floor was the only other option. She reached the front of the room. Hesper was the officiant. Lena had not known that until this moment, and she registered it with a recognition she could not entirely account for. Hesper, who had waited to see what kind of person Lena would turn out to be, who had written things in her folder and asked 3 questions, and been neither skeptical nor warm, but simply attentive. The ceremony was short, formally short. The words were old, taken directly from the charter language, and they had the formality of old legal texts, precise and airless, and slightly removed from the living moment, in the way that formal language always was. She said the words she was asked to say. He said the words he was asked to say. And then at the end of it, when Hesper indicated the formal statement, and Calum turned to her to deliver it, the final covenant declaration that each party made to the other, not to the room. He spoke in a voice that was too low for most of the room to hear. She heard it. She would not repeat it. She would hold it, though, file it in the same place she had filed the South Path and the gray ribbon, and the word her name in a midnight corridor. She would hold it with both hands, and not examine it too closely yet, because the examination would require her to make a decision she was not ready to make. Afterward, the room did things rooms do at the end of formal occasions. People moved, and spoke to each other in small groups, and the formal arrangement dissolved into something more ordinary. Owen shook her hand, and said something congratulatory and professional. Bram said fewer words with more weight, which she was learning was Bram's style. Hesper looked at her for a long moment and then said, "You have good posture," which in context felt like something Hesper had decided was the highest available compliment, and had given it freely. She thanked them. She found Claire at the edge of the room, and Claire pressed her hand briefly and said nothing, which was the right thing. She looked for Calum. He was across the room, in the middle of a conversation, with 3 council members who had the focused postures of people discussing something pressing. She watched him from across the space, the way he stood, and the way he listened, the slight forward lean that meant he was paying attention, the one note he made in the small notebook he always seemed to have in his jacket pocket. A man with a notebook, and no roses in his character, who had roses in his garden, and knew every species by name. A man who prepared information badly, and knew it, and kept trying. She looked at the room, the stone floor and the high ceiling, and the west windows, with the afternoon light coming through them horizontally now, turning everything the color of old honey. She thought about the cottage, about the 3 blankets, and the cold fire, and the 11 days of silence before the gathering in the rain, before the wrong tent, before the South Path and the scroll, and all of this. She thought about spring. She went to the window and stood in the light and waited for the room to finish being what it was. Later, when the formal afternoon was done, and the palace had settled back into its ordinary rhythms, she went to the garden. The roses were finished. The beds were bare. The light was going fast now, the days getting shorter every morning, and the air had the particular clean cold of early winter. Not cruel yet, just serious. The kind of cold that asks you to pay attention. She sat on the low bench. She was there for a while before she heard the footstep on the garden path. He sat down on the bench. Not close. The same careful distance he had maintained in the garden the first time, 2 or 3 feet of considered space. He was still in his ceremony clothes, as she was still in hers. Neither of them had changed, and neither of them commented on it. "You heard it," he said, not a question. "Yes," she said. "It was." He stopped. "I know what it was," she said. Silence. "The south beds," she said. "Yes?" He said. "In spring," she said. "I would like to see them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "They bloom in late spring. The red ones first, then the yellow. The yellow ones are better." "I will wait for the yellow ones," she said. They sat for a long time in the garden as the light finished going, and the first stars appeared, and neither of them spoke, and it was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say. It was the silence of 2 people who had said enough for one day, and knew it. The cold came down off the hills. She did not go inside. Neither did he. Later, when the cold had become the kind that would not be ignored any longer, they walked back through the garden to the main building side by side, not speaking, not needing to. The path was narrow enough that they walked close together, and the lanterns along it gave just enough light to see by, and the palace ahead of them was lit and warm-windowed in the winter dark. She thought about a person who had looked at the same path, the same lanterns, the same lit windows, on how many evenings before this one. She thought about a person who had done the looking, and was not here anymore. She thought about how you carry a loss that is not your loss, how you acknowledge the weight of it without taking it from the person it belongs to, how you stand close to something that has already been broken, without trying to fix what is not yours to fix. She thought, presence is its own form of help, sometimes the only available form. They came through the side door into the warmth of the building, and Claire was in the corridor and took their coats without comment, and the ordinary machinery of the palace resumed around them, the sounds and the movement, and the late evening rhythm of a large building closing down for the night. She said goodnight at the staircase. He said it back. And then, after a pause, he said, "The yellow roses, in the south beds, they bloom in late spring." "You mentioned that," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know. I am mentioning it again." She looked at him. "Because," she said. "Because I would like you to see them," he said, "when they bloom." She held that for a moment. It was not a declaration. It was not even quite a hope. It was the statement of a man who was saying, in the flattest and most literal way possible, that he intended for her to still be here in late spring, and that this mattered to him, and he was willing to say so directly, in a corridor at the end of a ceremony day. "I will be here," she said. "Yes," he said. He said it without relief, without performance. Just the acknowledgement of something that had been said and had landed where it was aimed. Then he said goodnight again and went down the corridor toward the wing where the administrative offices were, which meant he was going to do more work tonight, which she had already come to understand was his pattern, and probably always would be. She went upstairs. She sat in the good chair by the east window and looked at the dark outside and the lanterns in the courtyard below, and thought about what had happened today. A ceremony she had not chosen, a dress that fit, words said too quietly for the room to hear, a garden at dusk, and two people who did not go inside, and a man who had mentioned the yellow roses twice, which was not nothing, which was in fact quite a lot, from a man who measured his words with the care of someone who had learned the cost of the wrong ones. She thought about what came next. Not the formal structure of what came next. She knew the administrative shape of it, the household arrangements, the council expectations, the ongoing Eastern Ridge situation that would require more attention before it was resolved. She knew all of that. She was thinking about the shape of the days, the rhythm of a life in this place, building itself from the small materials of morning light and records rooms and garden paths and soup that Claire brought and maps spread on tables and notes in a small book. She was thinking about becoming a person in this building. Not the outer settlement girl who had stumbled into the wrong tent, not the person the charter had processed and the council had assessed, not the bride in the ceremony today, or the woman who had looked at a scroll and felt anger and fear and grief all in the same moment. Herself, a person with information and a coat and a missing button that was now reattached, and a very specific knowledge of terrain that had already proved useful and would prove useful again. A person who was going to see the yellow roses bloom in the south beds in late spring. She sat in the good chair and looked at the east window until the dark was complete outside, and then she lit the lamp on the table and opened the notebook and wrote a few lines, and then she closed it, and the building settled around her, and the night moved along its ordinary track toward morning. It had been, she decided, a significant day. Not in the way she had expected it to be, but in the way things were when you stopped expecting them to be a specific thing and let them be what they actually were. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about yellow roses and late spring and a man who mentioned things twice when he meant them. She slept. Outside, the east garden was dark and still, and the south beds waited in the cold, holding what they would give her when the time came. The Eastern Ridge moved on a Tuesday, not a metaphor, the literal movement of organized groups along the territory boundary, in numbers that the watch reported with the specific brevity of people who had seen enough to know that brevity was the appropriate register. Owen came to find Calum at the fourth bell of the morning, with a face that had the contained quality of controlled alarm, and Calum was awake before Owen knocked, because Calum was almost always awake before anyone knocked. Lena heard this secondhand. She heard it from Claire, who brought her breakfast 2 hours later than usual, and set it on the table without her usual efficiency, which was how Lena knew something had shifted in the building's atmosphere before Claire said a word. "The ridge," Lena said. "Last night," Claire said, "the third watch saw movement. This morning, there were reports from the outer settlements." She stopped, caught herself, looked at Lena. "Which outer settlements?" Lena said. Claire told her. Lena stood up from the table. She had not touched her breakfast. She crossed to the window and stood there for a moment, looking at the east horizon, which looked exactly as it always looked, and gave nothing away. Then she crossed to the door and went downstairs. The council room was occupied. She could hear voices through the door. 4, maybe 5, and the sound of papers being moved. and the particular rhythm of people discussing something they were all looking at simultaneously. She did not knock. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she went to the records room. The maps were where she had left them. She spread 3 of them on the table, and took out her small notebook, and went through what she already knew, adding what she had just learned from Claire, running the arithmetic of terrain and movement and distance and time. The eastern branch of the third road. She had been right about it existing. Owen had confirmed it after the midnight conversation, had come back to her, quietly, through Claire, with a single sentence. The eastern branch is passable in 3 sections. Not a word more. But that was enough. If they were moving from the ridge toward the inner territory, the eastern branch would give them a corridor that bypassed every standard watch position. The map showed it clearly, if you had both the 3rd and 4th age surveys, and knew what you were looking at. She had both. She had been looking at them for 2 weeks. She worked for 45 minutes. Then she took her notebook and went back to the main corridor and knocked on the council room door. Silence. Then, come. She opened the door. There were 6 people in the room. Owen at the table with his focused posture. Bram standing at the far wall with her hand on the territory map pinned there. 3 other men she recognized from the council meetings but had not spoken to. And Calum, at the head of the table, with his notebook open in front of him, and the expression of someone who had been awake since before the 4th bell, and was managing that fact with considerable discipline. She had expected this. The pause, the various calculations happening behind different pairs of eyes, the slight recalibration of who was in the room, and what her presence meant. She held the pause without filling it until it had done its work. Then she walked to the territory map on the far wall, the one Bram was standing beside, and she pointed to a section along the eastern boundary. The eastern branch of the 3rd road, she said. It was documented in the 3rd age surveys as a secondary route, closed 140 years ago. Owen confirmed 2 days ago that 3 sections are still passable. She looked at Owen. Yes? Owen looked at her, and then at Calum. Calum made a brief gesture that she read as confirmation. Yes, Owen said. She turned back to the map. If they are using this route, the standard watch positions on the Ridge Road see none of it. These 2 points. She indicated positions on the map with her finger. Would provide coverage, but they are not currently staffed, because the eastern branch does not appear on the 4th age maps, and the 4th age maps are what the watch positioning is based on. The room was very quiet. If they reach the lower fork before you have coverage on those points, she continued, the corridor opens directly toward the southern settlement road. The outer settlements on the eastern boundary would have 12 to 15 minutes of warning at best, depending on how fast the watch can relay. She turned around. Everyone was still looking at her. She met the room without flinching, because she had not said anything she was not sure of, and she was not going to qualify what was accurate. Who told you about the eastern branch? Said one of the councilmen she had not spoken to before. His voice was not hostile, genuinely asking. I found the 3rd age surveys in the records room, on my 9th day here, she said. I have been reading them since. And Owen's confirmation. 2 days ago, she said, after I spoke to him about what I found. The councilman looked at Owen. She is correct about the surveys, Owen said. I should have brought this forward sooner. He paused. I was still assessing. There is no more time for assessment, Bram said from the wall. She was already looking at the map with new attention, recalculating something. Calum stood. The room shifted when he stood. Not dramatically, not in the way that rooms shift for performance. Simply the shift of a space reorganizing itself around the person who was about to take an action. He looked at the map. He looked at the 2 points Lena had indicated. Then he looked at her. How confident are you? He said. In the terrain analysis, very, she said. In the movement timeline, less so. I don't have enough information about their numbers or pace. But the corridor exists regardless. The question is not if it's a risk. The question is how quickly you can change the watch positioning to account for it. He held her gaze for 2 seconds, then he turned to Owen. The next 40 minutes were organized and fast, and she was not part of them. She stepped back from the map and stood at the edge of the room while the council moved and talked and gave directives through the door to runners who appeared and disappeared with the practiced efficiency of people who had drilled for this. She watched it from the edge, and felt the particular feeling of a person who has contributed a piece of information at the right moment, and now has to stand aside and let the people whose job it is use it properly. She was fine with that. What she was not fine with was the outer settlements. The ones Claire had named, the ones on the eastern boundary, below the point where the corridor opened if they were too slow. She found Claire in the corridor outside the council room. The outer settlements on the eastern boundary, she said. They need to be reached before the watch repositions. They need to know to move inward, to the secondary settlement road, not the eastern one. Claire looked at her. Then she looked at the council room door. I will tell Aldrich, Claire said. Tell him now, Lena said. Claire went. Lena stayed in the corridor. She stood very still and thought about the eastern boundary and the outer settlements and the shape of the terrain she had lived near for 22 years. She thought about the winter mornings and the cold fires and the 11 days of silence before the gathering in the rain. She thought about the people who still lived there, in the cottages she had lived near, on the boundary that the inner territory treated as the edge of its responsibility. They needed 12 minutes. The watch needed 12 minutes to move. She had given them a head start of 2 days' warning and 45 minutes of planning. That would have to be enough. Caleb came out of the council room at the 5th hour. He stopped when he saw her in the corridor. She was still standing where she had been, not going anywhere, not doing anything, just waiting with the particular patience of someone who has done what they can do and is now enduring the time it takes to find out if it was enough. He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked the full length of the corridor to where she was standing. He was still in his ceremony clothes from 3 days ago. No, that was wrong. It just looked that way. The dark clothes were similar, and he had the focused gravity of someone who had been in an emergency situation for 4 hours and was now walking toward a person rather than a problem, which was a different kind of focus, and she could see him making the adjustment. The repositioning is ordered, he said. Owen is coordinating the Eastern Watch. Bram is riding to the outer settlement road to confirm the corridor condition. And the settlements? She said. Aldrich sent riders an hour ago, he said. Eastern boundary first. She breathed out. Good, she said. He looked at her. The look was not an assessment this time, not the recalibration she had seen him make in the council room, or the careful directness of the garden, or any of the modes she had catalogued over 3 weeks. It was something simpler and less managed, just looking. You should not have been in that room, he said. He said it without heat. It was not a reprimand. It was something more honest. I know, she said. If the council had been less, if the situation had been. I know, she said again. I went in anyway. He nodded slowly. The Eastern Branch, he said. You found it in a record room in the first 9 days of being here. The maps were available, she said. They have been available for 6 years, he said. To people who have spent 6 years in this building. She looked at him. She understood what he was saying, and she did not make him say it more directly than he was comfortable saying it. I come from that part of the territory, she said. I read those kinds of maps because I had to. I was looking for specific things because the situation required it. What situation? He said. She held his gaze. The situation, she said, of being in an unfamiliar place with people who have all the information and trying to understand enough to be useful rather than simply present. The corridor was quiet. From behind the council room door came the low murmur of continued planning, and from somewhere outside, the sound of horses being readied in the courtyard. You succeeded, he said quietly. The watch repositioned in time, she said. We'll know if I succeeded when we hear from Bram. Yes, he said. They stood in the corridor together, the horses in the courtyard, the murmur behind the door, the building working around them. Go and eat, he said. You haven't. She realized she had not. You noticed that, she said. Claire told me you left your breakfast, he said, before you came downstairs. She looked at him. You have Claire informing you about my meals. Not informing, he said. She mentioned it. She was concerned. Claire was concerned about my breakfast, Lena said, while the eastern ridge was moving along the boundary. Claire is thorough, he said. And there it was. Not quite a smile, not built the way a smile was built, but its neighbor, its close relative, The thing he made when something was a little bit true, and a little bit funny, and he was not pretending otherwise. She felt the thing in her chest again, the one she had been not examining. She was going to have to examine it soon. "I will eat," she said. He nodded. He moved past her toward the council room. She stepped aside, and then paused with his hand on the doorframe for a moment. "Lena," he said. She turned. "The outer settlement riders," he said. "Aldrich sent 4. The eastern boundary settlements will have warning." She understood what he was giving her. "Thank you," she said. He went back into the council room. She went to the dining room and ate everything on the plate Claire brought her, and sat for a long time in the midday light, while the palace worked around her, and the riders went where they needed to go, and the watch repositioned along the eastern boundary, and somewhere to the east, the terrain did what terrain did. Weighted, neutral, accurate, indifferent to what happened on it, but available to anyone who took the time to understand it. The report from Bram came at the 7th bell. The eastern branch was confirmed passable in 2 of 3 sections. The movement from the ridge had not yet reached the lower fork. The repositioned watch had coverage now, and the settlements had been warned, and the corridor was no longer a blind spot. Owen came to find her personally. "You gave us the advantage," he said, simply, without theater. "The surveys gave you the advantage," she said. "I just read them." "The surveys have been in that room for 60 years, he said. "Then it's good I arrived when I did," she said. Owen looked at her for a moment with the watchful expression she had noted at the council meeting. Not skeptical, not quite skeptical, something arriving at a different conclusion. "Yes," he said, "it is." He left. She sat in the dining room for another hour, and thought about everything and nothing in particular. And then she went upstairs, and stood at the east window, and looked at the dark, and thought about the outer settlement on the eastern boundary, and the people in it, who were moving toward the secondary road tonight, because 4 riders had arrived in time. She thought about 12 minutes. She thought about survey maps in the lower cabinet on the left, tied with a gray ribbon. She thought about a man in a corridor an hour ago who had stopped walking toward a problem in order to walk toward her, which was a choice, and she was becoming increasingly aware that she had run out of room to pretend she did not know exactly what kind of choice it was. She stood at the window until the cold made the glass fog around the edges. Then she went to bed. Outside, the Eastern Watch held their new positions. The territory held. And in the morning, everything was still standing. She was up before the kitchen sounds started. She dressed and went downstairs in the dark hour before the palace found its daily rhythm, and she made her way to the map room and spread the eastern boundary surveys on the table and sat with them while the building woke around her. She was thinking about the man who had stopped walking toward a problem to walk toward her. She was thinking about it analytically, the way she thought about terrain. What did it tell you about a place when it had this feature here and that feature there, when one thing was present and another was notably absent? She was applying that kind of reading to a person. She was applying it carefully, and she was coming to conclusions she had been avoiding coming to for weeks. Owen found her at the 6th bell. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and the maps and said, "You have not eaten." "I am aware," she said. "Claire will." "I know," she said. "Sit down, Owen." Owen sat. She had noticed, over the past weeks, that Owen sat when she asked him to, which was not guaranteed in this building, and which she regarded as something she had earned through the map, and through the watch repositioning, and through the 4 hours of planning in the council room 2 days ago. "The ridge will receive word that the corridor is closed," she said. "When they do, what is the usual response from that kind of action?" Owen considered. Withdrawal, typically. Sometimes a period of continued presence to test whether the closure holds. And then, if it holds, a return to the previous baseline. The baseline being 12 years of unresolved access issues, she said. "Yes," Owen said. "So we are returning to the baseline rather than resolving it." Owen was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the map, and she could see him doing the calculations she had done at the window the night before. The arithmetic of what had been handled, and what had been deferred, and what the difference between those two things cost over time. "The access agreement," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have thought about it," he said. "I know," she said. She had inferred it from the way he had looked at Calum in the council room, when she mentioned the expiration date. That look was the look of someone who had already had this thought, and had not yet decided what to do with it. The timing has been, there have been other priorities, Owen said. There always are, she said, not critically, just accurately. Owen looked at the map. I will raise it in the next briefing, he said. Raise the outer settlement access at the same time, she said. Owen looked at her. They are connected, she said. The outer boundary settlements use the same road access structure. Whatever review happens for the ridge should happen for them at the same time. That will expand the scope considerably, Owen said. Yes, she said, it will. He wrote in his folder. She looked at the maps. Owen, she said. He looked up. You have been in this building for how long? 17 years, he said. And Mara, she said, carefully. His expression did not close. It shifted, the shift of someone who has learned to hold a subject with enough room around it to breathe. She was here for 4 years, he said. She died in the 6th year of the current reign. She knew the territory well? Lena said. She knew people well, Owen said. The territory through the people, she was good at. She could talk to anyone, any level, any background. She made people feel that what they said mattered, because she actually believed it did. Lena looked at the map. You miss her, she said. Everyone who knew her does, Owen said, simply. They sat with that for a moment. Then Owen closed his folder, and stood, and said he would have the morning briefing prepared. And he left, and Lena sat alone with the maps and thought about a woman who could talk to anyone, and about a territory that needed people who could do that, and about whether these things were in conversation with each other or simply adjacent. She thought they might be in conversation. Claire brought her breakfast at the 7th bell, set it on the corner of the map table without moving the papers, and she ate without looking up from the surveys, and the building moved into its day around her. She was here. She was working. She was useful. That was something she had not been sure was going to be available to her when the scroll arrived at her cottage door. It was available. She intended to use it. The tension did not break immediately. That was the thing about territory pressure from an organized force. It did not arrive and resolve in a single event the way a storm did. It built and held, and the holding was its own kind of siege, a war of patience waged at the boundaries of things, testing the edges to find where the edges would give. The eastern ridge did not move again in force after the first night, but they did not withdraw either, and for the next week the council met every morning, and Owen read reports with the controlled face of a man managing a sustained concern, and Calum was present at every meeting from the 4th bell onward, and absent from the dinner table more often than not. Lena noticed the absences. She did not point them out. She was still reading the maps. She had extended her scope now, past the eastern boundary, into the territory records that described the political history of the ridge communities over the last 50 years, because terrain was only one half of the information she needed, and the other half was why. Why now? What had changed or what they believed had changed? What they wanted, and whether what they wanted was something that could be negotiated, or something that had already been decided. She had a theory. She did not share it for 2 days because a theory, without more support, was just a story she was telling herself, and she had enough experience with her own stories to know they needed to be tested before they were trusted. On the 3rd day she found the record she was looking for. It was not in the survey room. It was in the charter archive, a separate section of the records floor that she had not been into before, because the shelves were labeled in the old administrative style, codes rather than categories, and she had needed to understand the coding before she could navigate it. The record was from 40 years ago, a boundary negotiation between the Aldenmore territory and the Ridge communities, resulting in an agreement about access rights to the lower eastern road, the main one, not the branch, for trade purposes. The agreement had been renewed twice, and then had expired 12 years ago, and had not been renewed. 12 years ago. She sat with that for a long time. 12 years ago was 2 years before Calum became Alpha King, 4 years before Mara died, 8 years before Lena arrived at a festival in the rain and made a wrong turn in the dark. She took out her notebook and wrote down the dates. Then she went upstairs and stood in the corridor outside the council room and knocked. Owen opened it this time. He registered her presence with a look that had none of the initial recalibration she had gotten from the council 3 weeks ago. He just looked at her and said, "Come in," and stepped aside. She came in. Calum was at the table with 3 maps spread in front of him, and a cup of something that had gone cold at his elbow. He looked up. She put her notebook on the table. "The access rights agreement," she said, "the one from 40 years ago, regarding the Lower Eastern Road. It expired 12 years ago." He looked at the notebook, then at her. "I know about the agreement," he said. "But it wasn't renewed," she said. "No," he said. "Was that deliberate?" A brief pause. "It was deferred," he said carefully. "The political situation at the time made renegotiation complicated." And then, he stopped. The pause was the kind that had a name she did not say. "And then, other things happened," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the maps on the table. Then at her notebook. "The ridge communities depend on that road for trade access to the central market," she said. "Without the formal agreement, the access technically falls under general territory entry protocols, which means, and inspection checkpoints, which were added 4 years ago." 4 years ago, she said. "Administrative efficiency measures," Owen said. It came out slightly flat. The flatness of a man who had said those words before, in a context where they had not aged well. She looked at Calum. He was looking at the table, at the map, at the specific section of boundary she had now traced 3 times in her head. "They do not want more territory," she said. "They want the road back." The room was quiet. "They have wanted it for 12 years, Calum said. His voice was even. It was the evenness of someone who was saying something they already knew, and were saying it out loud, because the moment required it. "And no one renegotiated," she said. Not accusingly, just accurately. "I should have renegotiated it," he said. 2 years in, when things had settled. I did not." She looked at him. "There was a great deal happening 2 years into the reign," Owen said. He said it carefully, the same way Claire had said things about the palace, informationally, without the details that were not his to give. "I know," she said. She was not looking at Owen. Calum had his hands flat on the table. He was looking at the border maps, with the expression of a man sitting with a mistake, not in anguish, not in self-recrimination, in the honest quiet of someone who has seen something clearly, after not seeing it clearly for a long time. "If it can be renegotiated," she said, "can it stop this?" "Possibly," Owen said. "Probably," Calum said, at the same time. She looked at the map. "The movement along the boundary," she said. "Has it escalated since the watch reposition?" "No," Owen said. "It has actually slowed in the past 2 days." "Because the corridor is closed now," she said. "The advantage they had is gone. If they were moving to create negotiating pressure, rather than to actually invade, closing the corridor takes away their leverage. That is the current assessment," Owen said. "Then they are waiting to see if the leverage worked," she said. "They want to know if anyone is paying attention to the right thing." The 3 of them were quiet for a moment. "Open a contact channel," Calum said. He was talking to Owen, but he was looking at the map, through the trade registry. "Not a formal diplomatic channel. That will take too long, and read as political. The trade registry. 40 years ago, the agreement was signed at that level. Start it there." Owen was already writing. "Do not offer to reopen the old agreement," Calum continued. "Offer to review the access fee structure as part of a general administrative review. Give them the opening without the flag." "Timeline?" Owen said. 5 days, Calum said. "I want contact made before the end of the week." Owen left. Lena picked up her notebook. She was about to leave as well. She had said what she came to say. The room had people in it who would do the right things. But she stopped. "Calum," she said. He looked up. "The outer settlements," she said. "The ones on the eastern boundary, the 4 riders reached them in time." "Yes," he said. Are they under the same access conditions as the ridge communities, the checkpoint fees?" A pause, a brief one. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at her notebook, then back at him. "When this is resolved," she said, "the Eastern Access Review, I would like it to include the outer settlements." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She left. She went to the east garden and sat on the bench in the cold winter air, with her notebook in her lap, and the bare rose beds in front of her, and the pale sky above, and the sound of the building working behind her. She sat there for a long time, and thought about 12 years and deferred decisions, and what happened to the things that fell into the gap between them. She thought about the outer settlement, about the eastern boundary road, and the checkpoint, and the fee that people with very little money paid every time they needed to move their goods to the central market. She thought about her own years of moving carefully around the edges of systems she had not been consulted about, finding the gaps, and the workarounds, and the alternative routes that worked, not because they were good, but because the official ones were closed. The survey maps in the lower cabinet. The eastern branch of the third road. The south path through the woods on a rainy night. She thought about the particular skill of knowing how to navigate a landscape by reading it, rather than by trusting the official version of it. She was very good at that. She wondered if it was something that could be useful here, beyond emergencies, beyond the urgent moments. She wondered if it was something the palace needed, and simply had not known it needed, because the people with that skill were not usually the ones in the building. She thought about that for a long time. Then she went inside and had dinner alone at the small table on the third floor, and she was almost done, when she heard footsteps in the corridor and the knock at her door. "Come in," she said. Calum opened the door. He was still in his day clothes, which at this hour meant he had not had time to stop being the Alpha King long enough to be anything else. He stopped in the doorway, at the threshold, as always. She looked at him. "Owen says the contact channel request was sent at the third bell," he said. "Good," she said. "It should reach the Ridge Registry within 2 days." "Good," she said again. He did not leave. She looked at the plate in front of her, which was empty, and the cup of tea that was still warm. "Sit down," she said. A pause. Then he came in, and sat at the small table across from her, and Claire appeared 3 minutes later, with a second cup, without being summoned, because Claire was thorough, and set it down and left without commentary, because Claire was also tactful. They sat across from each other at the small table on the third floor. "The Outer Settlement Review," she said. "I want to be part of it." He looked at her. "Not in an official capacity necessarily," she said. "I am not asking for a title or a function. I am saying I know those roads, and those communities, and those people, and I have information that is useful, and if there is going to be a review, I want to contribute to it." "You are already contributing to it," he said. "I mean formally," she said, "in the room, at the table." He was quiet. "The council will have opinions," he said. It was not a refusal. It was an accurate statement. "I know," she said. "They had opinions about me 3 weeks ago too." They adjusted. His expression moved again toward its almost smile. "Yes," he said, "they did. Hesper said I had good posture," she said. "Hesper does not say things she does not mean," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I remembered it." They sat for a moment. "The Eastern Access Review," he said. "You will be part of it." "Thank you," she said. He drank his tea. She drank hers. The small table between them was a simple thing. Wooden, slightly uneven on one leg so it rocked if you put your weight on one side. And there were 2 cups on it, and 2 people at it, and the window beside them showed the dark winter night outside, with the watch lanterns moving in the courtyard below. "You should eat," she said. "I ate at the 5th bell," he said. "That was 7 hours ago," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Claire," she said. Claire appeared so quickly that she must have been in the corridor. "Something from the kitchen?" Lena said. "Of course," Claire said. She was already gone. Calum looked at the door where Claire had been. "She was in the corridor," he said. "She is thorough," Lena said. He made the sound that was not quite a laugh. She had learned to listen for it. The brief release of something he usually kept in. The sound of a person who was finding something genuinely amusing, rather than performing amusement. Claire returned with bread and soup, and set it in front of Calum, and left again immediately. And he ate. She watched the night outside the window and did not watch him eat, because watching someone eat was its own kind of attention that she did not want to be obviously giving. But she was aware of him at the table. She was very aware of him. In the particular way you become aware of a thing you have been carefully not looking at directly for a long time. The way it fills peripheral space. The way your attention moves toward it without your permission. She had been not examining the thing in her chest for 3 weeks. She looked at the window. She thought, I am going to have to examine it soon. Then she thought, I already know what it is. She did not say any of this. She sat at the table and looked at the dark outside, and waited for him to finish eating, and thought about what it meant to know something, without having decided yet what to do about the knowing. The ridge contact, she said. When they respond, will you tell me? Yes, he said. Even if the council thinks it is not relevant to me. Yes, he said. And the outer settlement review timeline. Yes, he said. Lena. She looked at him. I will tell you, he said. I have said I will tell you things, and I will. You do not need to list them. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. Old habit. From the outer settlement, he said. From anywhere I have not been trusted, she said. Which is most places. The table between them was quiet. This is not most places, he said. She held that. No, she said. It isn't. Outside the watch lanterns moved in the courtyard. The night was very clear. Somewhere to the east, along the boundary she had been reading for 3 weeks, the ridge communities were waiting for an answer, and the outer settlement people were on the secondary road, or back in their homes, and the third age maps were rolled back in the lower cabinet with the gray ribbon, their information used. She looked at the man across the table, who had come to a small room with a cold cup of tea, and sat down without being asked, and was now eating the soup Claire had brought, because she had told Claire to bring it. She thought, I already know what this is. She thought, I have known for a while. She thought, I am going to have to decide what to do about it. Not tonight. But soon. She went to the window again after he had gone. The watch lanterns were still moving in the courtyard, their rhythm unchanged, the building's overnight machinery running, as it always ran. She stood in the cold air, and thought about what it meant to know something clearly, and to still be deciding what to do with the knowing. The outer settlement had taught her to hold things, to carry information for a long time before acting on it, because acting on information too quickly, in a place with limited resources and limited allies, was how you made expensive mistakes. You waited. You built certainty. You moved when the picture was complete enough to read. She understood that caution well. But she also understood its cost. The Ridge Access Agreement had been deferred for 12 years because of caution, because of other priorities, because the moment never felt fully ready. And the price of that deferral had been 12 years of people paying checkpoint fees they could not afford, and then a week of movement along the boundary that had required repositioning the watch and sending 4 riders in the night, and 2 days of tension in the council room. Caution was not free. Sometimes the most expensive choice was the choice you did not make. She stood at the window. She thought, I know what this is. She thought, I have been waiting for the picture to be complete. But the picture does not complete itself. You read it to the point where you have enough, and then you make a decision with what you have. She had enough. She had had enough for some time. The recognition settled in her, the way certainties settled. Not loudly, not with drama, just as the natural conclusion of a long process of looking. She stood at the window and let it settle, and then she stayed there for a while longer, not because she was undecided, but because she was taking a moment to understand what she had decided. In the morning, she would ask Owen about the Eastern Access Review timeline. In the morning, she would read the last of the third age surveys she had not yet finished. In the morning, the ordinary work of the territory would continue, and she would be part of it. And at some point, not tonight, but soon, in a corridor, or a garden, or a small table with a rocking leg, she was going to say the thing she knew, to the person it was about. Directly, without preparation, the way accurate things were best said, plain, clear, once, and then allowed to stand. She was very good at saying accurate things. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about a choice that was not made in one moment, but in 100 small moments, accumulated over weeks, and she thought that was probably the right way to make a choice, actually, not in a single decision, but in the steady accumulation of smaller ones, so that by the time you arrived at the named thing, You had already been moving toward it for long enough to be certain it was real. She was certain. The watch lanterns moved in the courtyard below, somewhere in the east wing. A door opened and closed. A late-night errand, probably, or Caleb still at his desk working, which she had come to understand was his version of what she did when she could not sleep, fill the hours with something that had the shape of purpose. She thought about a person who was afraid of the quiet. She thought about a person who filled things for people she cared about. She thought about herself, which was neither of those exactly, but something that contained elements of both, and also contained the eastern branch of the third road, and the gray ribbon, and the smell of cedar and iron that she had known from a cold tent in the rain, before she knew anything else about him. You outside, the night was clear and cold. Inside, the palace held. She closed her eyes. She slept. The Ridge sent their reply on a Friday. It came through the trade registry as Caleb had arranged, a formal response to the access fee review inquiry, written in the specific administrative language of people who are saying one thing and meaning another, which Lena had learned to read the same way she had learned to read survey maps, by understanding that the official version was only half the document. Owen brought it to the records room where she was working. He set it on the table without comment and waited. She read it twice. "They want a meeting," she said. "The language says they are open to administrative consultation," Owen said. "Which means a meeting," she said, "with representation from the territory administration." "Yes. Are you going to send Caleb?" "That question," Owen said carefully, "has not been answered yet." She looked at the document again, at the signature at the bottom, a name from the Ridge Administrative Council she did not recognize but could trace, given the territory records she had been reading, back to a specific community on the northern edge of the Ridge boundary, which was the community most directly affected by the expired access agreement. "They will send their leading voice," she said. "Whoever signs this document will not be who they send. They will send the person from the northern edge community, because that is where the impact is highest, and that is where the political weight is." Owen looked at the document. "How do you know about the northern edge community?" he said. "The territory records," she said, "from the third and fourth age. The northern edge has the densest settlement and the most established trade relationships with the central market. They need the road most." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Caleb is considering going himself," he said. "There is an argument for it and against it. The argument for it," she said, "is that a personal meeting signals that the territory takes this seriously and is committed to resolution. The argument against it is that if the meeting goes badly, there is no higher level of intervention available." "Yes," Owen said. She looked at the document. "What does he want to do?" she said. "I believe," Owen said, with the careful phrasing he used when reporting something that was not his to characterize, "he is inclined to go." "Then he should go," she said. Owen looked at her. "The risk of not being taken seriously," she said, "is a real risk. 12 years of inaction has created a credibility gap. A representative, however senior, is still a representative. If he sends someone, the Ridge Council will understand that to mean the territory administration is willing to resolve this, but not willing to prioritize it. That reading is consistent with 12 years of experience, and they will not be wrong to make it." Owen was writing in his folder. "I'll bring this to the morning meeting," he said. "Yes," she said, and then, "Owen." He looked up. "I would like to attend the meeting at the Ridge," she said, "if it happens." The pause was a considered one. "I will convey that," he said. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He wrote something additional in the folder and left. She sat with the Ridge reply for another hour, reading the administrative language until she had extracted what was there and what was not there, and then she rolled it carefully and set it beside the survey maps and went upstairs. The morning meeting happened at the fourth bell, and she was not in it. She walked the east garden, the bare beds, the winter grass, the iron lanterns along the path that were not lit in the daylight, and she thought about the meeting and what was being said in it, and she practiced the particular patience of someone who has done the work and has to wait to find out if the work lands where it was aimed. Claire found her at the sixth bell. "The morning meeting," Claire said. "Caleb would like to see you." She went. The council room had thinned. Owen was there, and Hesper, who she had not seen in the council room before. Hesper's territory was the charter, not the operational decisions, and her presence meant something was being decided at the level where the charter governed. Calum was at the table. She sat. "The Ridge meeting," Calum said. "I am going myself. I want you there." She looked at him. "Owen conveyed your point about the credibility gap," he said. "It is correct. And the Northern Edge community leadership, their primary concern is the outer settlement access as much as the Ridge access, because the two trade routes are linked. You know the outer settlement side of that equation. I do not." She held this for a moment. "The council," she said, "not a question exactly, has views," Hesper said. It was the first thing she had said. She said it with the flat evenness of someone who had managed council views for many years and found them a manageable obstacle rather than a fundamental problem. "I imagine they do," Lena said. "Your presence at a negotiation meeting, 8 weeks into your arrival at this palace," Hesper continued, "will generate commentary." "Yes," Lena said. "Commentary that implies that the Alpha King is being directed by a person from the outer settlement who read the wrong maps at the wrong time and blundered into the right tent," Lena said. Hesper looked at her. "The commentary will exist regardless of what I do," Lena said. "Commentary of that kind exists before anyone does anything to generate it. The question is whether ignoring the commentary means missing the more useful resource." Hesper was quiet for a moment. "The Northern Edge community," she said. "Are you familiar with their leadership?" "Not personally," Lena said. "I know the records. I can work from those." "That will not be sufficient," Hesper said, "for this kind of meeting. Familiarity with the people matters as much as familiarity with the maps." "Then I will need a briefing," Lena said, "from whoever does know them." Hesper and Owen exchanged a look. "Bram," Owen said. "Bram has dealt with the Northern Edge community for 15 years. "Then I would like an hour with Bram," Lena said. "Before the meeting." Another look between Owen and Hesper. Then Hesper turned to Calum, who had been watching this without intervening. "She will do," Hesper said. It was not effusive. It was a precise assessment from a person who made precise assessments, and it landed the way Hesper's comments landed, exactly where they were aimed, neither more nor less than what was meant. "Yes," Calum said. "She will." The meeting was set for 8 days hence. In those 8 days, Lena had 3 sessions with Bram, who turned out to be a person of minimal words and enormous information, a person who held knowledge the way the landscape held the eastern branch of the third road, quietly, not announcing itself, available if you knew where to look, and were willing to do the work of looking. Bram told her about the Northern Edge community, about the families and the history, and the specific individual who would almost certainly be in the room, a man named Gareth, who was the current administrator of the Northern Edge Council, and who had been pursuing the access road issue for 6 of the 12 years it had been unresolved, and who was reputed to be patient and persistent, and not easily deflected by administrative language. "What does he respond to?" Lena asked. "Directness," Bram said, "and specific knowledge of the terrain. He does not trust people who speak in general terms about land they have not walked." "I have not walked it either," Lena said. Bram looked at her. "You have read it," she said. "That is not the same thing, but it is closer than most." She spent the rest of the 8 days reading and thinking and having conversations with Owen about what the territory could offer, and with Aldrich about the administrative feasibility of the access fee adjustments. She read everything she could find about Gareth, which was not much from official documents but enough if you cross-referenced the trade registry records and the community appeal letters that had been filed and apparently not actioned over the course of 12 years. On the 7th night, she sat in the good chair by the east window with her notebook and made a list. She listed everything she knew, everything she could offer, every point where the territory's position intersected with what she understood the Northern Edge community to want, and where those things could be honestly brought together, and where they could not. She wrote for 2 hours. Then she looked at the list. It was not a complete picture. No list ever was, but it was a picture she could work from, and working from an incomplete picture was something she had been doing her entire life, because incomplete pictures were what the outer settlement gave you, and you either learned to work with them or you sat in the dark. She went to bed. The morning of the meeting, she woke early and dressed carefully. Not the ceremony dress. She had not worn that since the ceremony. She wore the dark green coat with the missing button at the collar, which she had sewn back on 2 weeks ago. And she looked at herself in the small mirror and thought, "This is who I am, and I am going in." The meeting was held in a building on the territorial boundary, neutral ground by convention, a practical space rather than a formal one, with a plain table and 8 chairs, and windows that let in a gray winter light. Gareth was already there when they arrived. He was younger than she expected, early 40s, weathered, with the direct eyes of someone who looked at land for a living and had transferred that habit to looking at people. He registered Calum with the assessment of a man meeting power he had been working against for 6 years. He registered Owen with professional recognition. And he registered Lena with a pause that was 1 beat longer than the others. She met his gaze and held it without explanation. They sat. Calum opened the meeting with a directness she had come to expect from him. No formal preamble, no performance of authority. He said, "We are here because the access situation has been unresolved for too long, and we want to correct that." Gareth looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Why now?" He said it without hostility, genuinely asking. Calum was quiet for a brief second, and then Lena said, "Because we read the right maps." Gareth looked at her. "The Eastern Boundary Surveys," she said. "Third Age, the eastern branch of the Third Road, and the access agreement from 40 years ago, and the renewal history, and the trade registry records from the Northern Edge community going back 12 years. She said it simply, without performance. Gareth looked at her. "Who are you?" He said, "I came from the outer settlement on the eastern boundary," she said. "I know those roads, not this road exactly. I have not walked it, but I know the people who depend on it, and I know what it means when an access agreement expires, and nobody reacts for 12 years. Gareth was quiet. Then he looked at Calum. "You brought her," he said. "Yes," Calum said. "Why?" Calum looked at Gareth with the directness she had seen him use in every significant conversation she had watched him have. "Because she is better at this part than I am," he said. Gareth looked at Calum, then back at Lena. Then he put his hands on the table and said, "All right, what do you propose?" And they talked. For 4 hours they talked, and she did most of the specific negotiating, not because Calum was absent from it, but because she was the one with the granular knowledge, and Gareth was the one who responded to granular knowledge, and between them, they built, piece by piece, the shape of an agreement that did what the expired one had done, and went 3 additional steps further, and included the outer settlement access adjustments she had asked for in the small dining room 8 days ago. At the end of it, Gareth looked at the notes Owen had been keeping. "This is workable," he said. "It is accurate," she said. "Whether it is workable depends on what your community accepts." "They will accept it," he said. He said it with the certainty of a person who knows their community the way she knew survey maps. Because it is honest. The previous agreement was honest. That is why it worked for 40 years. She nodded. "The renewal," he said. "When it is due, do not defer it." "No," she said. "We will not." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "You are from the outer settlement." "Yes," she said. "You read the Third Age surveys," he said. "Yes. And you ended up in..." He looked at Calum. Back at her. "Here. I made a wrong turn in the rain," she said. Gareth was quiet for a moment. Then something in his face shifted. A release. A small one. A person deciding to find something funny rather than complicated. "A useful wrong turn," he said. "It seems so," she said. They shook hands across the table. All of them, the full circle of the room. And then Gareth gathered his materials and stood and looked at her once more before he left. "The Outer Settlement Access Review," he said. "When that happens, include us. We have an interest in it." "I will remember," she said. He left. The room was quiet for a moment after the door closed. Owen was still writing. Bram was looking at the windows. Calum was sitting still in the way he sat still when he was processing something significant, with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the middle distance. Then he looked at her. She looked back. "You are better at this part than I am," she said. "I said what was true," he said. "You said it to a man you were trying to build trust with," she said. Admitting a limitation is not a natural diplomatic choice. It was the accurate one, he said, and Gareth responds to accuracy. Bram told me that, she said. I have known it for 6 years, he said, quietly. I should have been in this room 6 years ago. She looked at him. You are here now, she said. He looked at the table. At the notes Owen had been keeping, the shape of an agreement. 4 hours of talking turned into 3 pages of manageable language. Yes, he said. That is what matters, she said. He looked at her. And this time the look lasted longer than 2 seconds, and she did not look away, and neither did he. And Owen was still writing, and Bram was looking at the window, and nobody else was looking at the two of them sitting at the table in the gray winter light of a boundary meeting room. She thought, I have known what this is for a while. She thought, I have run out of reasons to pretend otherwise. She did not say any of it, but she held his gaze, and he held hers, and that was its own conversation, the one that had been running below all the other conversations for weeks now. And in this moment, it was simply and clearly present, neither of them deflecting. Then Owen said, I'll have the draft agreement language ready by morning, and the moment folded back into the practical, and everyone stood and gathered their things, and they walked back to the carriages in the cold winter afternoon, with the gray sky above, and the road underfoot, and the territory all around them, alive and held and not yet broken. She walked beside Calum. The distance between them was not the careful 2 or 3 feet of the garden bench. It was less than that. Neither of them remarked on it. The carriage ride back took an hour. Owen and Bram sat together on one side and talked about implementation logistics. Calum sat beside her, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, that specific warmth she had known first in a tent on a rainy night a long time ago, before she knew whose warmth it was, or what it would cost her, and what it would give her. She looked out the window at the passing landscape. She thought, I am going to tell him. Not today, but soon. The carriage moved through the winter afternoon. She looked at the landscape going past the window, the road and the hills and the bare trees and the occasional light of a farmhouse in the distance, and she thought about what it meant to come from a place and to arrive somewhere else, and whether those two things were in conflict, or whether they were the same story told from different positions along its length. She thought they might be the same story. She was not certain yet, but she was closer to certain than she had been 3 months ago, standing in the rain outside a festival she could not afford, in boots that made sounds they should not make, looking for a shortcut that was not where she thought it was. The carriage moved. She kept looking out the window. The territory went on. Months later, when the winter had gone out of the hills and the first suggestion of something green was beginning at the edges of the east garden path, she woke before dawn. Not because of anything, not because of a sound or a cold or a worry left over from the previous day. She simply woke, the way she had always woken before significant things, her body deciding the night was over, before her mind caught up. The room was still dark. The east window showed the last of the deep night, not black now, but the particular dark blue that came just before the sky began its long, slow change. She lay still, and listened to the building around her, and the breathing beside her, which was slow and even, the breathing of a person deep in sleep. She had learned to recognize his sleep by its sound, the evenness of it, the way it deepened in the second hour past midnight, the way a part of him was still, and finally, and completely resting, which she understood was rare for him, because he was the kind of person for whom rest required conditions, quiet in the right way, safe in the right way, certain things settled and accounted for. She was one of the settled things. She turned onto her back and looked at the ceiling. It was the same ceiling she had been looking at for months. High, stone, with the slight imperfection in the plaster near the northwest corner that she had noticed on her first night and had been registering every morning since. She knew the ceiling the way she knew the east window and the key in the dish and the gray ribbon in the records room, the way you know things you have lived with long enough that they become part of the landscape of your days. Outside, the world was beginning, not noisily. The kitchen sounds would not start for another 20 minutes at least, and the guard change was still an hour off, and the east garden was completely still in the pre-dawn dark, the bare rose beds and the paved path and the iron lanterns all waiting in the cold for the light to start. She thought about the south beds, They had bloomed 2 weeks ago, the red ones first, exactly as he had described, and then the yellow, which were better, also as described, a particular dense gold that showed up well in the morning light when the low sun came in from the east at an angle and turned everything warm for the first hour, before it rose high enough to wash the color out. She had seen them. She had been standing at the east window when the yellow ones opened, not because she planned to be there, but because she was often at the east window in the morning, and she had looked down at the south beds and felt something she did not try to name, just held it, stood at the window and held it, the way you hold something precious that you are not entirely sure how to carry yet. The south beds had bloomed. She was here when they did. She turned her head and looked at him. He was asleep on his side, facing away from her, his breathing slow, one hand flat on the bed between them. She could see the line of his jaw, and the slight unevenness of his hair, and the shape of his shoulders under the blanket. She had studied all of this, not obsessively. She was not an obsessive person, but with the attention she brought to things she found worth understanding, the same attention she brought to maps and survey records, and the administrative language of documents that meant something different than what they said. She understood him now, not completely. She did not think you could completely understand a person without spending a long time being wrong about them first, and she still had things to be wrong about and correct and look at differently. But she understood the shape of him, the shape he made in the world. The posture in empty rooms, and the care he brought to information, and the way he said her name first thing in the morning, as if it was something he had been thinking about since before he opened his eyes. She thought about the scroll. She had not looked at it in months. It was in the records with all the other formal documents, filed by Claire in the first week, and it sat in there alongside the charter history, and the agreement from 40 years ago, and the third age surveys, with the gray ribbon. Just a document, part of the record of how things had happened. She thought about the night she had opened it. Standing in the kitchen of the outer settlement cottage with the carrier outside, and the cold fire, and the 3 blankets on the bed, she would not sleep in again, reading the words twice because they did not change, the feeling that was not quite anger, and not quite fear, and was made of parts of both. She thought about picking up the scroll and walking to the palace and telling him, an accident is different from an intention. He had said, yes, and I cannot override it in a way that would not be worse for you. He had been right. She had not known it then. She had been in the room, with her 4 structured points, and her shorter version, and her 1 honest sentence, and she had been so determined to make the argument for accident versus intention that she had not seen clearly what he was actually saying to her. He had not been defending the covenant. He had been telling her, in the plainest terms available to him, that the alternative was worse, that he had looked at the alternatives and found them worse, that there was a version of this, the version with her, the version with the covenant, that was actually the outcome he was choosing to protect, not enforce. She had not understood that then. She understood it now. She lay very still, and looked at the ceiling, and thought about all the things she had not understood then, that she understood now. The key in the dish, the south path, the way he had said you were cold and you were not a threat, as if those were the facts that mattered, as if the world was properly organized around those 2 pieces of information. She thought about a woman named Mara who had known him well, and had written in book margins and drawn at various heights on the walls of a small room, and who had said that he was afraid of the quiet, and so she filled it for him. She thought about what it meant to fill a thing rather than fix a thing, to not try to make the quiet go away, but just to be present in it, alongside someone, a different body generating warmth in a different way. She was not Mara. She had understood that from the first moment she read the handwriting in the margin, had felt it as clearly as she felt the cold air through the east window. She was not that woman, and she was not trying to be. She was the person who had read the wrong maps at the wrong time, and walked south through the dark, and arrived here through a series of accidents that had the persistent quality of being, on reflection, better than anything she would have planned. She was her own person. She was also here, present in this place, in this morning, in this room with this ceiling, and this man asleep beside her. And neither of those things canceled the other. Both were true simultaneously. She could hold both. Outside the east window, the dark was shifting. Not light yet, not properly, but the first fading, the deep blue beginning to thin at the edges in the way it always did. The slow announcement of something that had not happened yet, but was coming. She watched it. She thought about the Outer Settlement Access Review, which had concluded 4 weeks ago, with an agreement that reduced the checkpoint fee to a level that Owen described as administratively negligible, and that she described, in the conversation with the Northern Edge liaison, where Gareth had also been present, as correct. The review had included, as requested, the outer settlement communities on the eastern boundary, and the people she had grown up near, not alongside, not with. She had always been a little apart from them, a little adjacent to every community she had been in. Those people would move their goods more easily now, and that was a small thing in the accounting of a territory, and an enormous thing in the accounting of a life. She had been the one to push for it. She was going to keep pushing for it. There was more work here than she had understood when she arrived with her 4 structured points and her green coat with the button that had been reattached. The eastern boundary settlements were one piece of it. The access review was the beginning of a conversation that needed to be longer and more regular, and she was the person who could carry it, because she knew both the language of the palace and the language of the outer boundary, and people who knew both were rarer than survey maps that showed hidden roads. She was useful here, in ways she had not expected to be useful anywhere. She was doing things that mattered, and she was beside a man who had stood in a boundary meeting and said, "She is better at this part than I am," and had meant it, and had brought her to every room since that she had asked to be in, and several she had not asked to be in because he had thought of it first. She looked at him. She thought, "I am going to tell him." And then she thought, "I already have. Not in words. In maps and notebooks and open doors and a small table with a rocking leg, and soup that Claire brought because she asked for it." In 8 months of paying attention to a person who did not expect to be paid attention to, and had quietly, without making a production of it, restructured his life to include hers. She had already said it. So had he. The language they had used was not the language of declarations or ceremonies, or scrolls with wax seals. It was the language of who arrives in which room first, and where they sit, and whether they eat when they have not eaten, and what they say when the room is very quiet, and whether the quiet is still afraid of, or has become something else. She thought it had become something else. Outside, the sky was beginning in earnest now, the true beginning, the first color, not yet gold, not yet pink, just a lightening, a lifting of the dark at the edge of the world that would keep going and going, until the sun cleared the east hill, and the morning arrived proper. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned onto her side, facing him now, not away from the window, toward the window's direction, but also toward him, because the two things were not in opposition, because she did not have to choose between looking at the world and being present in this room. Both existed. She existed in both, simultaneously. She watched the window over his shoulder. She watched the morning come. It took its time. There was no urgency to it. The sky did not rush itself or apologize for the pace, did not explain the long transition from dark to gray to something warmer. It simply moved at the speed it moved, and she lay still and watched it, and beside her, the breathing was slow and even, and the building was quiet, and the kitchen sounds would start soon, and the east garden was beginning to show itself in the early light, the path, the iron lanterns, the rose beds in the south corner just visible at this angle, the last of the yellow blooms going brown at the edges now, the season turning. She had seen them open. She would see the next ones. She lay there. She thought, "I am still here." She thought, "I chose to be." Not the night she came through the tent flap in the rain. Not the morning she woke against a warm chest she did not know. Not the day the scroll arrived, or the day she walked into the palace with her 4 structured points, or the day Greta made a dress that fit, or the day she stood in front of a room of people and pointed at a map. She had chosen in small pieces, without a single moment she could point to, as the choice. She had chosen every time she stayed in a room, instead of leaving it. Every time she opened a cabinet, or read a record, or asked a question, or said to Claire, "I will come down to dinner tonight," the main dining room. Every morning, she had woken in this bed, and not moved immediately toward the window and away. It had been many small choices, and here was the morning they had added up to. She watched the sky lighten. Beside her, he shifted, the small adjustment of a sleeping person approaching wakefulness, the change in breathing that came just before eyes opened. She did not move. She stayed where she was, watching the window, present. She felt him become aware of her. She knew the moment he was awake. She could not have explained how she knew it. Some combination of the specific quality of the stillness, and the change in his breathing, and the way the body beside her became different from the body that had been asleep. She simply knew. He did not speak. She did not speak. For a long moment, they were simply both awake in the same space. In the early morning, the room still gray, and the window still lightening, and the birds beginning outside in the east garden, tentative and clear, the first sounds of a day assembling itself from its parts. Then he said her name. Just her name. One word. In the voice he used first thing in the morning, which was different from his daytime voice, quieter, less managed, something closer to whatever was underneath the management. "I am here," she said. "I know," he said. They lay in the gray early morning, and the light kept coming. She thought about the wrong turn. She thought about the rain, and the cold, and the tent, and the warmth she had found, without looking for it, and about the south path, and the old oak, and the smell of the road before you see it. She thought about all the instructions she had been given without knowing what they were instructions toward. She thought about a key in a dish, and a corridor with empty lamp brackets, and a book lying open face down on a desk, waiting for someone to come back to it. She had come back to it. She did not know yet all the things she would do with the time she had here, or all the ways the territory would turn out to be larger, or more complicated, or more worth fighting for, than she could see at this moment from this room. She did not know the precise shape of the years ahead, and she had stopped trying to map them, because some terrain could not be read in advance, and had to be walked in real time. But she knew the person beside her. She knew the building around her. She knew what she was capable of. She knew where the south path was. The sun cleared the east hill. The room filled with light, real light, morning light, the specific gold of early spring coming through the east window and falling across the bed and the floor and the high ceiling, with its small imperfection in the northwest corner, and the table by the window, and the small dish on the washroom shelf, where a key had once been left. The dish was empty now. The key was in her coat pocket, where she had put it and kept it, not because she needed it there, but because she had decided she was the kind of person who carried the key to things she loved. Outside, in the south beds of the east garden, the yellow roses were going to bloom again next spring. She was going to be here when they did. She was going to be here for all of it. She lay in the morning light, and breathed, and stayed.